Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto Doton master. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. The boy with a shock of spikily unkempt blonde hair ran as fast as his exhausted legs could carry him. Those crazy villagers were at it again. Today's afternoon weather was just perfectly fine in Konohagakure no Sato, the village hidden in the leaves, and he was on his way back to his apartment when all this happened, mercilessly crushing his hope of having a normal day. Without even bothering to find out how many pursuers were after him, one Uzumaki Naruto scampered down the street, hoping he could find a safe place to hide until the mob decided to give up on him. From up close, anyone could see that Naruto had lightly tanned skin, and was rather short and thin for boys his age. His most prominent traits, however, were the whisker-like birthmarks, 3 stretching on each of his cheeks. Risking a quick peek over his shoulder, the boy's expressive, cerulean blue eyes widened in fear as he realized the villagers were gradually gaining pace on him. "Stop the demon brat. Get him." "Why, monster? What do you mean? Let's finish what Yondaime-sama couldn't." What have I ever done to any of you?" Those were the confused thoughts screaming inside the boy's mind as he veered sharply past the corner of a fruit stall, almost losing his footing as he did so. Demon, monster, and even it were some of the usual words used by most of the villagers to address the blonde, who had absolutely no idea why he was their target of hatred. Last he checked his reflection in the mirror, he was just as normal looking as any of them could be, so why? Maybe because of those odd birthmarks on his cheeks? Or his blue eyes perhaps? Or, Naruto just did not know anymore. Gotta shake him off, somehow. Most, if not all shinobi he met on his way would just turn a blind eye to his plight. To them, it was as if Naruto were simply another part of the boring wall. Insignificant, invisible. Though, every once in a while when he was lucky enough, a silver-haired Anbu wearing an inu dog mask or another with black hair donning a karasu crow mask would come to his rescue, if they happened to be patrolling in the area. Today, however, clearly did not seem to be one of those lucky days. Huff, huff. It was some distances away before he managed to lose the group for now, and he was currently hiding himself behind a dumpster to catch his breath. With one hand pressed against the wall for better support, Naruto rested his other palm over his small chest, which was heaving rapidly as he greedily refilled his lungs with the much-needed oxygen. Rivers of sweat stung his eyes and his dirtied white shirt clung against him like a sticky layer of unwanted skin, but he ignored the uncomfortable feeling for the moment. Naruto knew he would need to get moving, and fast, knowing how persistent the villagers could be in making him their punching bag for the day. As if on cue, his ears picked up the rapidly approaching footsteps of the said group. Naruto sighed tiredly, gritting his teeth as he willed his burning leg muscles to move, and took off running once again towards the nearest place with the best chance to lose the approaching villagers. The Konoha Park. From a short distance away, a quick sweep of his surroundings told him there seemed to be no one occupying the place at the moment, which was good, as he did not have to worry about anyone giving away his location to the pursuers. From his 9-year-old standpoint, the big concrete pipes abandoned flat at one side of the park were his best bet to hide, and with a final burst of speed, his feet quickly carried him towards them, his expression hopeful. As he got closer, however, all his hope vanished the moment he saw a young girl sitting beside the very concrete pipe he wanted to hide in. Dressed in a simple cream-colored top and navy blue pants, the aforementioned girl was about his age, her cap of indigo, leveled cut-styled hair coming to stop just above her forehead with 2 chin-length strands framing her face. Though, what struck out the most to Naruto were her eyes, pale white, pupil-less with a soothing tinge of lavender in them. The spiky-haired blonde quickly recognized her as one of his more timid classmates in the academy, but that was all he knew about her, as she was usually shy and did not talk much to anyone during classes. Cerulean blue met white for a moment, but before either of them could say anything, the sound of incoming footsteps quickly jolted Naruto back to his senses like a clap of thunder, and he dived frantically into one of the nearest concrete pipes, ignoring the look of clueless confusion on the girl's face. Before long, the same group of villagers set foot into the park he was currently in. Naruto dared not breath. He could not afford to make any noise, knowing it would be a very bad idea. The blonde's heart hammered rapidly against his ribcage like a wild drum as he heard their footsteps became clearer and louder, fully aware of the painful consequences if they managed to get their hands on him. Then, something he feared the most happened. Now where's the Daa? Hyuga-sama, did you see a boy coming here just now? About this tall, with blonde hair? And one of the villagers had asked the girl, in a deceptively sweet voice that made Naruto feel like hurling the contents of his stomach. Though, he now identified the girl as someone from the infamous Hyuga clan, one of the most powerful clans in the village. With these strange marks on his cheeks. Don't tell him, please don't tell him, Naruto pleaded silently in his mind, his palms going sweaty as desperation gripped his thoughts. He was dead tired from the long chase they had given him, and had almost no energy left for any form of resistance if his current hiding place were to be given out. Squeezing his eyes tightly shut, the 9-year-old waited for the worst to come. Oh, please, no, don't. Naruto was downright terrified now. He knew this would happen. Just as he felt his heart would burst out of his chest. Went over tea that way to the bakery, I think, the Hyuga heiress finished with a shy voice, as she pointed to a totally different direction, away from where the blonde was hiding. Inside the concrete pipe, Naruto's blue eyes widened in utter disbelief. She. And just like that, the villagers immediately vacated the area after showering her with thanks, hot in pursuit on their elusive target like a swarm of angry wasps. The exodus of footsteps relieved Naruto somewhat, and he exhaled slowly, letting loose the long breath he had been holding. Though, that did not stop him from almost jumping out of his skin when the Hyuga knocked at the concrete pipe gently a moment later. Hey Anyo, you can come out now. They're gone. The exhausted blonde poked his head out, tentatively at first for a quick scan of his surroundings. It was only after he made doubly sure there were really no one else around did he fully get out of hiding, his tired blue eyes looking at the stuttering girl who had just saved him. Forming the sincerest expression he could manage in his current condition, Naruto gave a small bow of gratitude, panting slightly between each breath. That was really close. I don't know why you helped me, but thank you so much, Hyuga Hinata, Uzumaki, Naruto, though I think you might have seen me before, since we're in the same class. The blonde introduced himself with a sheepish smile despite the fatigue, his mood brightening up considerably. Hinata nodded meekly. In fact, she herself had wanted to talk to the blonde for a while now, ever since she first saw him in the academy class, but could not find the courage to do so. From her perspective, Naruto was always a hard worker and kind person in nature, despite how the villagers seemed to treat him like an outcast. On a few occasions, she even remembered seeing the boy breaking off little portions of his own food to feed a litter of homeless puppies during lunchtime. Hinata just could not think of what a person like Naruto could have done to deserve such enmity from the vast majority of the village populace. Why, you're hurt? The young Hyuga gasped, her white eyes taking in the rips on the blonde's shirt and shorts, easily spotting some nasty-looking scrapes and bruises beneath the ruined cotton. You should get those looked at by the medics. It's okay. I heal pretty fast. Naruto was inwardly taken aback by the concern in her tiny voice, but he kept up his sunny facade like usual despite the obvious pain. And I usually got worse than these. He added in his thought with a grimace, but did not voice it out, of course. These'll be all gone by tomorrow morning, so I'm not worried. Really? Hinata just nodded again, and Naruto knew it was the truth. By some inexplicable healing factor, he always recovered from physical wounds faster than anyone he knew. Cuts and bruises would usually heal overnight, and on the next day, his skin would show no scars or any signs at all that he was injured previously. Though, that was not important now, as another thought ran rampant across Naruto's mind at the moment. The boy took some time in silence, before mustering up the courage to ask the one question that always got laughed at or shot down harshly by his other classmates. But should he risk hurting his own feelings again this time? Naruto swallowed a nervous gulp as he looked at the white-eyed girl. She doesn't seem to hate me. I can do this. Just this one last time. Hinata. Right? He fidgeted a little, but nevertheless inquired as politely as he could. Say. Can you be my friend? There. He had said it, but Naruto felt like slamming his head into the closest concrete pipe. Repeatedly. He was meant to say it out nice and clearly, but ended up all tongue-tied and blurting it in a nervous mess. No, my biggest chance to make a friend, and I screwed up, the blonde thought bitterly. It was not his fault, but a product of growing up without much interaction with people from his age group. No one had ever taught him how to approach and greet his peers properly. Now she'll call me a freak for sure, just like everyone else does. Hinata just blinked in confusion. Much like Naruto had anticipated, she obviously did not catch what he had just said, but that was it. She did not start calling him names or anything, no idiot, freak, or stupid. Nothing. This meant he still had chance to make things right. I was saying, Hinata, can you be my FF friend? Please, he worked up the courage to ask again, slower this time, but still swallowed hard at the second last word. The blonde's few attempts to make friends in the academy were a big letdown, as most parents would tell their children to stay away from him simply because he was either bad influence or dangerous. Despite all his efforts to hide the feeling away from the world, it still hurt him quite deeply when he would think about it. After a few seconds of silence, Naruto began to lose hope, but nevertheless forced a grin. It's okay if you don't want to, haha. I get it, I mean, I'd like to. Naruto's heart skipped a beat. Her voice was so low he had almost missed it, but he clearly had not, so the blonde could not help but look dumbstruck. Did she just? A spark of hope bubbled inside his small chest. That was a definite first, he had not expected that at all. With the same expression, he could only look at the Hyuga heiress in disbelief as he tried to comprehend the statement. Why, you mean it? Really? Naruto almost mumbled, his tone shaky now. The boy seemed ready to break, his forced grin having vanished somewhere in the exchange. A shy nod was Hinata's reply. Feeling a lump rising in his throat, the blonde swallowed thickly. You don't think that I'm a monster or anything? No. The single word came out in her firmest tone yet, and Naruto was startled by the forwardness in her answer. In hindsight, it was louder than she intended, and Hinata's face heated up shyly at her own sudden outburst. Nevertheless, she quickly added, I am mean, I don't think you're anything like that, and Naruto-kun. She was still stuttering, but her tone alone was enough to tell him that she was being sincere. These were the very words he had longed for ever since he was much younger. He craved for them. Something inside the Uzumaki boy's chest felt warm, warmer than anything he had ever felt before as he tried to make sense of the emotions that were swirling inside him. The words caused what little control Naruto had over his emotions to break. The mask of forced cheerfulness he had worked so hard to maintain over the months cracked and crumbled into nothingness. Drip, 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 drip. Naruto blinked, feeling something wet land on his hand. Is it raining? The boy wondered, his vision started getting blurry and warped. The sky was still as bright as it had been a minute ago, without the slightest bit of indication that it was going to rain anytime soon. Even so, the wet sensation did not cease streaming out from the corners of his eyes and sliding silently down his cheeks, splattering on his hands and shirt. Looking down, he finally realized they were tears. His tears. A single sob slipped out of Naruto's now quivering lips, followed by another, and another, until he was unable to hold back the emotional shudders racking his entire body. For the first time in a long while, Uzumaki Naruto cried tears of pure happiness, unable to contain this overwhelming feeling. Why am I crying? I should be smiling, damn it. Naruto blubbered between sobs as he wiped his eyes quickly with one hand, but the wetness just kept trickling down his whiskered cheeks. Even so, regardless of his teary eyes and sob-racked voice, he flashed Hinata the biggest, real smile he could manage. Hinata. What you said earlier, they mean a whole lot to me. He added at the end, his voice wavering now. Thank you. The rest of the afternoon passed as a blur for Naruto, with him telling Hinata some of the best pranks he had managed to pull off on some mean shopkeepers, and the girl in question listening attentively as he described his stories with wide motion of his arms, chuckling as he got to the funny parts. It was his first time that he was actually talking normally to someone his age, but one thing for sure, it felt oddly. Well, the first word that came to Naruto's mind was, nice, but that did not quite describe it. It was a warm feeling of acceptance. As evening came, however, they had to split paths when Hinata's caretaker, one Hyuga Ko, arrived at the area, looking panic-stricken. There you are, Hinata-sama. You're supposed to be back in the compound since an hour ago. Hiyashi-sama is worried sick, the tall Hyuga said, his eyes widening slightly for a second when he noticed the blonde boy next to his clan's heiress. Though, Naruto noticed it was different from the cold looks he had received from the villagers throughout his life so far. This one held no malice at all, but instead it felt like the man was giving off an aura of sympathy. I am so sorry, Ko-san. Hinata quickly apologized, her hand rising to her mouth as she took note of the time. I think I lost track of tea time. Ko's expression softened. No matter, we must take our leave now. Come. Hinata nodded in understanding and walked her way towards her caretaker, but not without sparing a last glance at Naruto, who smiled and waved her goodbye. Ko, surprising the blonde, gave a curt but polite nod as well, which Naruto returned a little awkwardly, not really knowing how to respond. Watching as Hinata slowly leaving his field of vision, the spiky-haired blonde grinned brightly at himself at today's surprising turn of events. He would never forget what had happened today. He had finally made his very first friend, and vowed to repay her kindness for saving him from the villagers someday in the future. However, before he could do that, Naruto knew he would have to start improving himself. Yes, there would be lots and lots of hard work waiting ahead of him, but he would not let them daunt him in the slightest bit. A new light shone brightly in his cerulean orbs as he headed back home, his face set in determination that he never knew he had in him. Something had changed within the blonde ever since that day, and even if he did not know exactly what it was, he could feel it was for the better. Uzumaki Naruto was sure of it. From the next day onward in the academy, Naruto began to talk more to his newfound friend, whom he still found to be quite shy around him. Nevertheless, Naruto did not mind at all. Some of his classmates started finding it weird that the soft-spoken Hyuga was unusually talkative around the blonde so suddenly, but they did not give it much thought. After all, why should they care about what the Uzumaki freak was doing? Like usual, Naruto's academy sensei would ignore the blonde's queries during lessons, but that did not trouble him as much as it used to be. Naruto would consult Hinata after classes whenever there were any concepts he could not grasp in the textbooks, and the girl in question would explain patiently in ways which he could understand better. Though, Hinata had clan practices in the afternoon so she could not stay for too long, but Naruto was immensely grateful for her company. Yes, it was a slow process of learning, but he was steadily improving. Uzumaki Naruto, 10 years old. Now, our favorite blonde was in his second year in the ninja academy. His new homeroom teacher, a chunin by the name of Amino Iruka, was a fair and caring person, a complete opposite to the previous one who had taught him in his first year. The scarred chunin would always answer to Naruto's doubts when he asked, and treated him with equal attention like the rest of his classmates. Sometimes, Iruka would even treat Naruto to some lunch at Ichiraku Ramen, one of the very few eatery places in Konoha that accepted him, so Naruto was quick to include him in his list of his precious people. Over the months, Naruto's small ring of friends had included a few of his classmates who got along with him just fine, namely one Nara Shikamaru, his friend Akamichi Choji, and the feral-looking Inazuka Kiba along with his ninkin Akamaru. For second-year academy students, they were taught how to perform hand seals and mold their chakra, commonly known as a mixture of physical and spiritual energy within a person's body, which was essential to even the most basic of jutsu. It was not long later when they were taught the E-ranked Henge no Jutsu, a basic technique to change one's appearance by transforming into other individuals, animals, or even inanimate objects. Though, in order to maintain the changes in one's looks, it would be essential for the caster to constantly feed a certain amount of chakra into the jutsu, depending on the complexity of the transformation. A better henge would require more chakra, to put in short. It took Naruto quite a while to grasp the gist behind the technique, but he eventually got the jutsu down with Hinata's help as well as some tips from his sensei Iruka, and his life had been much easier around the village. He could now roam freely in the streets under the guise of a random academy student, and purchase daily needs such as fresh fruits, food and warm clothes without being cruelly overpriced. Not only that, some had even given him discounts for just being polite, too. It was simply amazing what a little disguise could do. He had been, for once, treated like a normal child his age. As of late, his choice of apparel consisted of a short-sleeved, black t-shirt emblazoned with a contrasting red swirl design on the front, complemented by a pair of matching, light gray sweatshorts. Though, in Naruto's opinion, the best thing about using Hange no Jutsu was that it enabled him to borrow books from the local shinobi library without any trouble, and under Iruka's suggestion, the very first book Naruto took home with him was Basics in Chakra. The hard-working blonde would usually read during nighttime, going as far as devoting long hours to make sure he fully grasped the concepts discussed in the pages. Through reading itself, Naruto discovered that proper control of chakra would enable one to perform shinobi techniques more efficiently, and in Konoha, that particular skill could be honed through tree and water walking exercises. It particularly caught his interest when he read about the different types of chakra natures, and that Konoha was especially famous for its lead in fire-related ninjutsu. Further reading told the blonde that each individual's elemental affinity could be revealed through the use of chakra papers, made from the tissues of chakra-sensitive trees bred specifically for that purpose alone. Early in the mornings, about 5 o'clock when there were not much people around, was Naruto's favorite time of day. The sun would be barely risen, still resting low on the horizon while he would busy himself with various physical exercises and taijutsu drills in Training Field 2, the furthest training ground away from the village center and thus usually left unoccupied. To be honest, Naruto doubted the vast majority of the village populace would even know of this secluded training ground. The place itself was rather decently sized, if not one of the largest among the other training fields scattered around the village. The grass here was kept comfortably short, with a few rock formations dotting here and there as well as some trees littering the area to give an impression of a real battleground as much as possible. A small lake stretched at one edge of it, glittering under the sun. Fresh, moist air filled the place, still and crisp, the silence only broken by occasional birdsongs overhead. It was a good spot, with majority of the harsh sunlight being blocked out by the back of the gargantuan Hokage monument, which conveniently happened to be located some distances ahead from this place. However, the most important thing that mattered to Naruto was that he could go about training to his heart's content without the villagers bothering him, and the scenic nature was just an added bonus to it. The blonde could truly feel at ease here. This place was his sanctuary. By a stroke of fate, this was also where Naruto had made another new friend, an older boy by the name of Rock Lee, as he ran past the area during one of his early morning laps. Below his mop of black hair, which vaguely resembled an overturned bowl of sorts, and sitting above round black eyes had to be the thickest pair of eyebrows Naruto had ever seen in his life. The boy in question easily stood half a head taller than Naruto, usually seen in a beige martial arts top with a V-neck opening in front as well as matching brown pants. From what the blonde had found out, Lee was 1 year older than him in the academy, and was frequently looked down by his peers since he was unable to mold chakra due to a birth defect, and as a result could not perform even the simplest of ninjutsu. So be it. With enough guts and hard work, I'll definitely prove to everyone that even a failure like me can become a great shinobi. That's everything to me, was what Lee told him when they had first become friends, and Naruto really respected him for his determination. Having devoted all his time into hand-to-hand combat skills, the bowl-cut boy was easily the best taijutsu user Naruto had ever met, the latter briefly wondering how someone of such skill could even be labeled a failure. One morning, when the blonde had sincerely sought Lee out for some pointers in an attempt to improve his katas, the older boy had replied exuberantly with a big thumbs up and sparkling teeth grin, much to his delight. Ever since then, Naruto had, without fail, made it part of his routine to practice with Lee every morning. The two would usually kick off with a light sprint, followed closely by a series of push-ups, sit-ups and the like before they would work on taijutsu katas. The boys got along pretty well, and Naruto considered himself really lucky to have met Lee then, often viewing him like a big brother of sorts. The older boy would patiently move around him and help correcting the mistakes in his flawed stances until he got them right, while throwing in some words of encouragement in the process. They would also spar sometimes, and although Naruto never stood a chance of winning so far, he kept working harder, never complaining or giving up. Yosh, for this one, you'll need to move your feet closer together, for more balance. Yes, that's better. Now hold your right fist up a little higher, and keep it firm, like this. Not too tight. Good, keep it that way. You're doing great, Naruto-kun, Lee coached during one of their morning practices. When Naruto had first shown him all the academy katas he had learned during his first year, The taijutsu-oriented youth quickly pointed out that there were tons of glaring holes in his stances, and it was only then the blonde realized his instructor at that time must have taught him the moves wrongly on purpose. He was pretty sure of that fact now, because the more mistakes he corrected under Lee's guidance, the more natural the cat is felt to him. Just to be on the safe side, the blonde had requested Lee to keep his presence here a secret, not wanting anyone else, especially not the villagers, to find out where he was. Much to his relief, Lee agreed without any questions, both trusting and respecting Naruto's privacy on the matter. As weeks went by, Naruto's taijutsu skills had really grown remarkably with Lee's help, evident when the blonde nearly ended in a draw during a friendly spar with Uchiha Sasuke, the top student of his class. Though thrilled by this development, Naruto did not stop there, instead redoubling his efforts to improve himself further. It was also under Lee's suggestion that Naruto decided to pay the local ninja equipment store a visit, which was what he was doing right now. It should be around here. Ah, found it. Naruto looked up from the small piece of paper with Lee's written directions on it, his feet coming to a stop before this humble-looking building with 2 floors. A large sign above him proudly proclaimed, Tagarashi's Shinobi Gears in big silver letters, the place as a whole looking just as normal as the rest of the shophouses in the area. And Naruto, under his henge of a random white-haired male academy student, took a readying breath before pushing through the double wooden doors as politely as he could. "Welcome, how may I help you?" The blonde was greeted almost immediately the moment a small bell tinkled overhead as he stepped into the store. The friendly-sounding voice belonged to a young girl behind the counter who looked no older than Lee, her midnight black hair tied up neatly in twin buns. Attire-wise, she clothed herself in a sleeveless, pink Chinese-styled top, ended with dark blue pants below the clothing. At a first sight's glance, Naruto was pretty sure he had seen the girl somewhere in the academy, but he just could not remember when. Naruto put up a smile, trying his best to be as polite as possible. "I'm looking for some training weights, do you sell them here?" "Training weights? Wow, it's been a while since we have anyone wanting those." The girl's expression lit up almost instantly, looking very intrigued at Naruto's request. Perhaps a little too excited, in the boy's opinion. "May I know what kind of weights are you looking for? And the size? Oh, and also." Other words were spoken, but Naruto did not really catch them. Instead, he gave her a nervous look. Lee had only told him to get himself some training weights, but did not specify which kind of it. Maybe he wants me to decide for myself." Naruto mused, not really knowing what to think. "Oi Tenten, don't scare the customer." A new voice interrupted from behind the girl now identified as Tenten, and this one belonged obviously to a man as he walked in from the back room, carrying a wooden crate of goods in his arms. From what Naruto could see, this individual was rather tall, most probably in his late 30s, wearing a simple white top and looking quite muscular. Scars, jagged-looking and likely gotten from combat, decorated his right cheek, and with one look Naruto could easily guess that the man was probably Tenten's father, since they both shared the same hair color and hazel brown eyes. Turning to their spiky-haired customer, he grinned. "Hello. Name's Tagarashi Tetsuka, owner of this humble store. And she's my daughter, Tagarashi Tenten." He turned to her, while placing the load in his arms onto the counter table. "Tenten, show our customer around so he'll have a better idea what he's looking for, alright?" "Leave it to me." The girl bobbed her head in acknowledgement, before looking forward to face Naruto. "Come on, I'll lead the way." With an eager nod and hoping everything would go smoothly for him, Naruto was just about to follow after her, but not the girl's father chose this moment to interrupt him. "Ah, yes, before that, please kindly drop the henge." The man gave Naruto a expectant look, his eyes studying him knowingly. "It's always my policy here to know exactly who I'm selling my goods to." "What? But, how?" Naruto, who clearly did not expect that, was rooted on the spot. He had been so sure there were absolutely no mistakes in his disguised form before he made his way inside, so how? This was not supposed to happen, no way. As if seeing the words forming on Naruto's lips, Tetsuka decided to answer the unasked question. "I was a Junin before I decided to retire, for your information." "Of course, why didn't I think of that before?" The young Uzumaki bit his lips nervously, mentally berating himself for his lack of forethought in the matter. It was totally possible for someone who was running a shinobi equipment store to be one of them as well, or at least used to be one, in this case. The logic had been so obvious, and yet it had never crossed his mind until he got caught in his current predicament. Guess it doesn't really matter now. A former Junin. If what the man had said about once having that particular rank was really the truth, then Naruto saw absolutely no point of hiding behind his disguise any longer. Sighing, the boy's shoulders slumped in a defeated fashion, canceling the transformation technique and revealing his real self, blonde hair, whiskers-marked cheeks and everything. His blue eyes watched as Tenten's father looked taken aback for a brief second, and the boy felt his hopes sinking to the deepest pits of his stomach. Having fully expecting himself to get thrown out, Naruto chose to do it himself, his face downcast as he was about to turn around towards the exit. However, what he saw out of the corners of his eyes in the next second was something he had expected the least. The man smiled. Naruto was shocked, and he looked up to make sure his eyes were not playing tricks on him. The man had actually smiled. He really did, and it was different from those fake smiles he had seen from the other shopkeepers, too. Different from those who would overprice even the smallest thing he wanted to purchase. This one felt so sincere and kind, and the only other adults he had seen giving him these kinds of smiles were his teacher Iruka, the sandaime, the ramen chef Tucci and his daughter Ayame who worked at Ichiraku, his favorite eatery stall. Somehow, Naruto felt some of the nervousness from earlier evaporated into thin air, and he started to calm down. See? That wasn't so hard, was it? Tetsuka's voice brought Naruto's mind back to the present, as the blonde turned his attention to the man and nodded, albeit still a bit timidly and looking somewhat perplexed. Tetsuka continued smiling, and even Tenten, too, showed only the slightest bit of curiosity as of why he had to disguise himself inside their store, but was still smiling as amicably as she was before. Naruto swallowed hard, not really knowing what to say, or think for that matter. Thankfully, the shop owner helped him by changing the topic. Now, I believe you're here for some training weights? Oh, Naruto nodded again, firmer this time as the rush of warm feeling began to thaw his nervousness. Then come this way, please. Follow me. Tenten beckoned with a wave of her hand for the boy to come, and he did, though he still had that disbelieving expression from earlier plastered on his face. They actually let me in here? It was Naruto's first time inside a shinobi store, so he grabbed the chance to really take a good look around the place, pausing for a moment whenever his blue eyes caught sight of anything interesting. In all honesty, the blonde found every single thing here interesting. He couldn't help but watch in wonder as Tenten led him past a great collection of shiny new kunais, shurikens and other pointy stuff along the way, as well as some of the longer weapons like katanas, ninjatus and bow staffs all lined up neatly in polished glass cases. They came in all sorts of shapes and sizes one could ever think of, and that, in Naruto's opinion, certainly made everything look twice as fascinating. This place is so cool. Other ninja tools such as smoke pellets and what seemed to be exploding tags, from what Naruto could recall from one of the pictures in his academy textbooks, were stacked neatly in more durable containers, while ninja armors as well as protective vests of all kinds occupied the opposite wall of the shop, each of them very sturdy looking and awesome. Okay. Maybe save for that one at the corner which sported a rather spooky design, to Naruto's eyes at least. Though, it was then he remembered that he had forgotten to do something rather important. Oh, I'm Naruto, by the way. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto pointed at himself as Tenten continued leading the way around the store, the boy not wanting to be rude since the shop owners had already introduced themselves earlier. A rather guilty tone weighed down his voice as he continued, and sorry about the henge earlier. Well, it's just that, he swallowed hard, I mean, most of the people doesn't like me much, so. I see, then it's alright, I don't mind, Tenten nodded, feeling quite sympathetic about the younger boy's plight. Although a part of her was really dying to ask why, she did not attempt to prod the touchy issue any further, having been taught to respect a customer and all. But even if she did, Naruto wouldn't have an answer ready. He had been mulling over the same question again and again ever since he was much younger, but no one would tell him the answer. Turning around, Tenten placed a hand on his shoulder and gave him a reassuring squeeze. Well, here is different. So make yourself comfortable, nay? Relax. Thanks. Naruto allowed a grin to rise slowly on his face. He was starting to like this place. It was already hard enough to believe he had met a shopkeeper who actually accepted his presence, not to mention said person was friendly towards him. Feeling a change in the conversation topic would be nice, Naruto decided to do just that. Tenten-san, are you in the Ninja Academy? I think I might have seen you before. Tenten-san, she blinked, pausing in her steps for a brief moment, and Naruto wondered if he had accidentally offended her or anything. Though, before the blonde could say anything on the matter, said girl just looked sheepishly at him. You're being over-polite, but really, just call me Tenten, the bun-haired girl added with a smile. And yes, I'm currently in my 3rd year. Oh, she's in the same year as Lee. Naruto noted quickly. One of his classmates, probably. Naruto, was it? When she received an affirmative nod in return, she went on. If you don't mind me asking, why are you into training weights? She quickly added, not that I'm trying to pry or anything, just kinda curious. It's really been a while since we have customers looking for those, you know. Actually. Naruto grinned, looking as if he was thinking of how to put his reason into words before he began to explain rather enthusiastically. I'm just taking a suggestion from a good friend. Says they'll do me good for my speed and stamina in the long run. Tenten nodded in approval. It was quite rare to see someone younger than her taking physical training this seriously, but it was not unheard of. And finally, after walking past a myriad of weapons, shinobi vests and more weapons along the way, they stopped before a large metal rack on which Naruto believed to be laden with training weights. Well, here we are. Feel free to try any of them if you want, but please be careful. Tenten turned to the various objects on the rack with a sweeping gesture. Some are really, really heavy. Naruto allowed his eyes to roam through the assortments of equipment, one at a time. He first started checking on the dumbbells as well as some bulky-looking straps, and even noticed the same weight rods Lee was using in his training, but decided those were not what he thought would suit him. And so, he kept searching. At last, his eyes were drawn to a set of black-colored bands, which outwardly looked no different like those ordinary ones made from normal fabric. 2 wristbands and ankle bands, to be exact. Carefully taking one of the wristbands, Naruto fully expected it to be heavy, but much to his surprise, it weighed exactly as light as what a normal fabric band could be. Unsure of what to think, he furrowed his brows, looking at it in confusion. This was supposed to be a training weight, right? Chakra weights, one of our very best, Tetsuka said suddenly and appeared behind Tenten, startling both of the youngsters as they jumped slightly. Tenten crossed her arms and huffed, muttering something that sounded suspiciously like, what happened to not scaring the customer. Laughing heartily at the sight, Tetsuka turned to Naruto, who was snickering a little at this and waiting eagerly for him to elaborate more. Unknowingly, the blonde was beginning to feel at ease around those two. These are waterproof, and made out of very durable threads. The mesh coverings along the surface would allow more comfort and let your skin breathe. The shop owner went through the details of his product expertly, going into what Tenten dubbed as business mode. And what makes them special is that unlike our other training weights that held a fixed amount on them, these are adjustable. They have weight seals placed inside by an expert seal master. Following so far? The 10-year-old nodded that he understood the most part, taking a better look at the one he was currently holding. Sealing arts, based on what Naruto had heard, were notoriously known for the sheer difficulties to gain complete mastery over them. The blonde had come across little tiny bits of introductory parts about seals in his studies, but that was all. That did not mean he was uninterested, however, as he was eager to find out how to activate the weight seals at the moment. Now, all you need to do, the man began again, slowly so that Naruto can understand, is to push some chakra into it for roughly 3 seconds, and depending on how much you've put in, it will have an increase of weight accordingly. Am I safe to assume that you know the basics of chakra channeling? At this, Naruto nodded again, now with a big grin adorning his whiskered face. The very skill was what required to maintain Henge no Jutsu properly, after all. Good, then please go ahead. Tetsuka returned with a smile of his own, inwardly noting how much his customer's contagious grin seemed to have affected him as well. It certainly reminded him of a person he once knew very well. Go on, give it a try. And Naruto did, as he strapped one wristband around his right wrist, before pushing from his center what he thought to be a small amount of chakra, and directed the warm feeling into it. Nothing seemed to happen at first, but suddenly he found himself stumbling a little when he felt his right arm began sagging downwards due to the increase in weight. Evidently he had poured a little too much chakra into it. Whoa. Naruto muttered, amazed at how much effort he needed to just simply lift his right hand back up. How do I return it to normal? It's easy. You simply have focus on it like what you did before, but instead pushing chakra. Try to feel as if you're trying to pull the chakra out of it instead. The seals will do the rest, they're designed to work that way. Naruto mouthed an "oh" in understanding, and quickly decided to give it a go. Doing exactly just like what he was told. The boy tried imagining himself calling the warm energy he had just supplied into the wristband back to him. A second or two passed, he was not sure, and wow! Naruto waved his right arm and looked in wonder at the black weight band once again, now feeling as light as it was before. It was simply astounding what seals could do, and whoever designed this must be nothing short of a genius, in the boy's opinion. I did it, all right. Tetsuka took a second to glance out of the pure, sparkling interest in Naruto's eyes, and based on what his past experiences and gut feeling told him, he smiled inwardly. It would seem that a really hard worker had stumbled into their store, and he was pretty damn sure of it. The shopkeeper's attention was brought back to the present again, however, when he saw Naruto's mouth open to say something. This is awesome. The blonde grinned widely as he repeated the whole process for a few more times, before his shoulders visibly drooped as a sudden thought began to sink in. But, I'm guessing they're really expensive? It'll be 4,000 ryu for the whole set. And these are the last ones we have at the moment, as the materials and sealing expertise needed to make them are pretty difficult to come by these days. 4,000 ryu. Upon hearing the amount, Naruto swallowed hard. That amount of money would mean almost 2/3 of his overall savings from the monthly allowances, given to him by the Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen. Though, taking notice of Naruto's increasingly troubled look, Tetsuka felt a part of him grew softer, though I think I could give you a small discount, for being our first customer of the day. That said, Naruto perked up immediately with a hopeful expression. He could not believe what he had just heard. Even Tenten shared a similar expression, her mouth gaping and perfectly imitating a fish. No way, that did not just happen. She had never seen her father giving discounts to anyone. Not even the Sandaime Hokage himself. Ignoring their shocked looks, Tetsuka reached forward and placed his hand on Naruto's untamed, blonde spikes of hair, patting them fondly. Well, and it's been quite a while since I've seen someone your age taking training this seriously. So how does 3,500 ryu sound? A slight frown marred Naruto's face as he contemplated the pros and cons of his two available choices. Buying normal, non-adjustable weights like the weight rods would definitely be cheaper, no question about it, but he would need to replace them with heavier ones when he got used to their weights. Moreover, wearing normal weights would put him in a disadvantageous position. He would have no choice but to stop and remove them if he ever need a speed boost in sticky situations such as, say, escaping from the village mob or in the middle of a fight. On the other hand, these adjustable chakra weight bands were way different. He could wear them anywhere he go, and he just had to pour in more chakra to increase their weights when he got used to the current ones. The material used to make them was very elastic too, so he would have no problem to continue using them even as he grew physically. To add icing to the cake, he could return them to their original lightweights anytime without having to take them off, which would give him tremendous advantage in situations where he could surprise his foes with a sudden increase in speed. That thought, above all else, sealed Naruto's decision to pick the latter choice for all its advantages in the long run. Sure, I'm buying the chakra weight bands then, Tetsuka-san. That'll be 3,500 ryu total, the shop owner told him, nodding. And is there anything else you might need? Naruto looked thoughtful for a moment, and he grinned. I guess I'll take some chakra papers, too. After paying for his purchase as well as bidding the father and daughter goodbye, Naruto made a beeline back to his apartment, feeling glad that there were only a few people in the streets since it was still early. Some of them gave him the usual, cold look, but the boy ignored them. He was far too excited for anyone to spoil his good mood today. Once Naruto was out of earshot, Tenten turned to her father, with a confused, questioning look in her hazel brown eyes. Okay, something strange was definitely going on here. Her father giving discounts was one thing, but there was another issue that troubled her mind right now, and she really needed some answers. It wasn't like her father was one to make such obvious mistake, right? San, the actual price of the training weights just now. It was not 4,000 ryu, but 40,000, am I right? But, why? I knew she'd ask that. Sighing internally, Tetsuka understood that he could not tell his daughter the complicated truth. Only Naruto could, that was, if he ever find out in his life. Instead, the man decided to respond with the closest answer he could manage, his eyes still gazing at the path outside their store where Naruto had been seconds ago. Just now, for even the slightest moment, he could have sworn he saw the image of a certain spiky-haired, blonde Hokage grinning proudly behind the boy as he disappeared into the distance. Seriously, take away the whisker marks and you'll have an exact carbon copy of the Yondaime. How come none of the villagers is smart enough to see that? Ma. Just doing a favor for an old friend of mine, Tetsuka smiled enigmatically, revealing nothing else. Tenten just pouted at the vague reply, causing the man to laugh heartily at her. Before the girl could question further, however, the timely arrival of a new customer quickly distracted her out of her thoughts. Welcome. Back in Naruto's apartment room. The walls here were painted a cheery shade of baby blue as far as Naruto could remember, and his home was really simple. A moderate space equipped with an all-purpose room at the front which served as both his living as well as bedroom, followed by a small kitchen at the back, and finally a washroom where he would normally clean himself up every day. This place had a strategic sense of being located within direct sight of the Sandaime from his office atop the Hokage Tower, something which Naruto was extremely grateful for, as the fear of angering the powerful man kept the villagers from vandalizing it. The modest living area where Naruto currently found himself in was clean but pretty bare for the most part. Atop a wooden wardrobe at the side where he kept all his clothes stood a desk calendar as well as an alarm clock, accompanied by a full-length mirror hanging on the wall next to it. Small pots of leafy green plants could be seen around the corners and hanging from the ceiling, all well taken care of with a few of them bearing flowers. A simple, single-layered bed lay just a couple of steps away from a ramen poster by the glass windows, with a blue swirl-patterned blanket folded neatly on top of it. All in all, it was not much, but it was home. Back to the situation at hand. Naruto was rather eager to try out his new training weights. He quickly put on the black bands, strapping the correct pairs snugly around his wrists and ankles. Channeling different amounts of chakra into one of them, the boy experimented with the increase in weights before he finally decided on a suitable amount of resistance to start with. He did the same with the other three by channeling roughly the same amount of chakra he had fed into the first one, of course. This feels rather awkward, Naruto said to no one in particular as he tried moving his limbs. He could still move them, but it was much slower than usual due to the added weight. Then, a determined look spread across his demeanor. He was never one to back down from a challenge. But hey, I gotta start from somewhere, right? I could get used to this. He engrossed himself with the newly bought training weights for a little longer, before making his way over to the blue futon where he had left his other purchase, slowly as his body was still adjusting to the new weight. Naruto proceeded to peel a single piece of the chakra paper and hold it in his hand, studying it intently. Just as the books had described it, the card-sized paper looked no different than ordinary ones at all. Let's see. If my chakra nature is fire, the paper will burn; if water, it gets damp; lightning, it crinkles; wind, it gets cut up; and earth, it crumbles to dust. Naruto recited inside his mind exactly what he had read from the book. Now, if he just flow a little amount of chakra through the paper, he would find out the nature of his chakra. The boy swallowed hard, eyeing the thin object intently for a little longer. His hands were shaking slightly in excitement as he did exactly what he should, channeling the smallest amount of chakra he could into the small piece of paper. He closed his eyes, and waited. When his cerulean orbs greeted the results a second later, his mouth opened in realization. The entire piece of paper had become damp, and there was a small cut at the end of it. Water, and wind, Naruto breathed in disbelief, his smile quickly replaced by a grin. He had natural affinity towards two types of chakra. Just to make sure it was not a mistake, he peeled off another piece of the special paper from the small stack he had purchased and did the same procedure again, but it still produced similar results. He grinned widely. According to the book, it was usually known only for Junin-level shinobi to possess two chakra natures, and it was still a pretty rare chance for it to happen. Knowing this, it was impossible for him to not be in his good mood at his latest discovery. Since water was his main affinity, Naruto figured he should borrow some more books to get better understanding on it, before attempting to learn any of the lower-rank Suidan jutsus from the scrolls available in the Konoha library. Oh, and borrowing a jutsu scroll itself should not be that big of a problem, since all he needed to do was to henge into a Konoha genin to access. Well, the genin's corner of course. Also, it was the very same civilian librarian on the academy section who was responsible for that particular corner, so this would be a piece of cake to him. No problem. A few days later, in the Konoha local library, Naruto could be seen busying himself at the genin's ninjutsu section, under his usual disguise of course. Since it was near noon, there were not much people around in the library, so the boy had most of the space for himself as he feasted his eyes to the moderately sized rack, packed with D-rank to at most low C-rank ninjutsu scrolls. During his search, Naruto discovered that there were not much scrolls on water-related techniques, so his options were pretty limited. Getting into a thinking pose, he mused over the most suitable one to start with. This one should be good. Naruto's nodded to no one in particular as his eyes skimmed thoughtfully over the content of a blue Suidan ninjutsu scroll he was currently reading. Though it was stated as a low C rank, Naruto could recall the jutsu's name somewhere inside one of the best books he had read by far, and this jutsu was greatly recommended by the author for beginners. Who was the author again? Naruto was pretty sure it was someone named Senju Tobarama or something like that, and though the name now did sound vaguely familiar, he did not remember when he had come across it. Naruto decided let that thought slip his mind. Alright, then it's decided, Naruto whispered under his breath, his excitement barely containable inside his mind. I'll give this one a shot. 3.5 months later. Suidan. Naruto inhaled deeply as he did the necessary hand seals in a fluid motion. 3 in total for the very same low C-rank water ninjutsu he had been learning from the borrowed scroll. Lee had left some time ago, so the boy was left to his own devices, currently facing the lake at the end of his favorite training field. It got plenty hot during this time of the month, and knowing from his first day experience that practicing water ninjutsu would mean getting himself wet quite often, Naruto had shucked his black t-shirt for better comfort. That left him in only his usual pair of gray drawstring shorts which went a little past his knees, followed by blue shinobi sandals. Worn snugly around his wrists and ankles were, of course, the chakra weight bands that he had purchased not long ago. Naruto had been wearing them to everywhere he went, steadily increasing their weights by a little after every week. Physique-wise, Naruto was no longer the skinny boy he once was during his earlier childhood, now looking more filled up ever since he had gained easier access to more nutritious food using his Henge no Jutsu. He still loved ramen nevertheless, but he tried to have a more balanced diet whenever he could. Faint lines of boyish muscles were beginning to show on his young body, particularly on his biceps, chest and abdominal as a result of his regular physical workouts with Lee, a testament to all the hard work he had been through. Naruto had gained a little but noticeable amount of height as compared to his first year in the academy, too. Misurappa. Pushing the estimated amount of chakra to his mouth, the boy puffed his cheeks and expelled a strong jet spray of water, which spread out like a cone of swirling wave towards the lake. The end result was a semi-loud explosion as the pressurized blast collided violently against the serene lake surface, sending splashes to its surroundings. This was his 12th repetition for the morning, and Naruto grinned in satisfaction as he watched the jutsu ended. It had taken him a little more than 5 weeks to be able to perform the jutsu correctly, which was pretty incredible, considering the fact that he was still only an academy student and had worked it out all by himself through a long process of trials and errors. During Naruto's first few dozen of attempts, all he could do was tiny, feeble squirt of water. Though, looking at what he could do with the jutsu now, he was really glad he had not given up trying back then. As soon as he could perform it right, he had been practicing the technique over and over again, like what he was doing just then. If there was one thing Naruto had unconsciously picked up from Lee, it was that practice made perfect. According to an illustrated book by that same Tobarama person, Suidan, Misurappa, water release, violent water wave, was one of the commonly used jutsu for shinobi to create their own supply of water for more devastating Suidan ninjutsus, and depending on the amount of chakra he fed into the technique, its strength was also varied. A pretty neat one, Naruto admitted. Salty beads of sweat rolled down his face, intermingling with the droplets of water that had splashed onto his skin from earlier practices and tracing down the rest of his uncovered skin. Brushing away a sweat-drenched spike of blonde hair plastering against his forehead, Naruto grabbed a towel he had brought along with him and quickly cleaned himself up, noting that he still had a good half an hour left before the academy class would start on that morning. With a content sigh, Naruto plopped backwards and stretched out in a comfortable sprawl, the stalks of dewy grass as well as light breeze coming as a cool relief to his skin. The blonde grinned when a bird fluttered down to perch on his shoulder, chirped at him cheerily, and then flew off to the distance. For some reason, smaller animals always seemed to be rather attached to him. Watching serenely as a few leaves floated gently to the ground to join several more of them on the sea of green, he savored the peace a little longer, before finally springing back to his feet once he decided he should probably get going. Wouldn't want to be late, Naruto told himself as he picked off a few leaves that got stuck to his back and hair. The preteen promptly reached down and collected his shirt from where he had left it on the grass, before pulling the garment over his head. It had been a good day so far, his training was coming along great, and his morning was shaping up just nicely. Until now. Just as his head popped out from the top opening of the soft cotton, Naruto's smile faded when he caught a sliver of movement on the periphery of his senses, which was followed by a strange, unnatural rustling noise coming from a thick, distant bush outside the training field. Alarmed, the blonde jerked towards the direction and suspected a large animal, probably a deer, but his gut feeling told him otherwise. Throughout all the times he had trained in this area, he had never seen any animals bigger than birds around here. What was that just now? It made him uneasy, somehow. With curiosity getting the better of him, Naruto hastily finished getting dressed and decided to take a look. Something fishy was definitely going on, he just knew it. Naruto approached as noiselessly as he could along the way, pausing a few times to look around in uncertainty as he moved onward. It did not take him long before he took a careful peek behind the bush, and what he saw, however, shocked him. There, lying on the grassy ground was a girl with her arms and legs tied up and her mouth gagged with a fistful of cloth, and what surprised him more was the fact that she was someone he had known too well. No way, it can't be. Hinata? The boy gasped, shock evident on his face. The girl's head snapped up almost immediately at the mention of her name, her expression morphed into a hopeful one as she looked at her familiar blonde-haired friend, her pale white eyes welling with unshed tears. From his position, Naruto noticed she had no wounds on her person, and that calmed him down a little. But what the heck was going on here? What happened? Naruto asked in genuine concern, as he quickly approached the girl. Who did this to you? He could tell Hinata was trying to say something, but whatever that came out of her throat were muffled by the gag in her mouth. The first course of action Naruto had instinctively decided in his mind, naturally, was to free the girl of her restraints. He was only halfway in his steps, however, when he saw her pearly white eyes widened in shock. Hinata's hair whipped back and forth as she shook her head frantically in alarm, as if warning him about some unforeseen danger lurking around the area. It was then a new presence decided to make himself known. Oh, and I was hoping none of you stupid tree huggers would find this place. The 10-year-old blonde felt his blood freeze over as an unfamiliar voice drawled from behind him. It was unmistakably a man's, the tone coming relaxed and unmotivated, but Naruto felt otherwise as a sense of foreboding began washing over his senses. Whoever it was definitely unfriendly, and his previous speech hinted the blonde that this man did not, by any chance, belong to Konoha. But it turns out to be just some random brat. Oh well. Just as the last syllable reached Naruto's ears, his eyes widened just in time to catch a glimpse of a gleaming silver metal. A kunai in the stranger's hold, its sharp tip heading straight towards his neck without warning. There was no time for anything else, and every instinct inside of him screamed only a single word. He had to move. Time seemed to stand stock still at the moment. Naruto willed his body to move out of harm's way. Hinata's eyes widened even further as she saw the kunai descended in slow motion at her spiky-haired friend, and the mysterious assailant had a strangely sadistic grin on his face. There was a metallic flash of cold steel, a rustle of leaves, and the sickening noise of kunai greeting flesh echoed in the still morning air. Raita Hokori was a Junin in Kumogakure no Sato, the village hidden in the clouds, but in truth his fighting prowess was at best mid-Chunin level as compared to those who were truly Junin level. It was a hasty promotion by the Council of Kumo when they were low in their main force during one of the village's endeavors to suppress a small-scaled invasion from one of their neighboring villages, and Hokori was able to keep this rank since then no orders of taking it back were ever issued. Well, lucky him. Personality-wise, this silver-haired man was very prideful of himself. He did not train much, but was always considering himself several cuts above those whose ranks were lower than his, and would usually boast to his peers about how he was going to create history for Kumogakure very soon. Today, his dream would come true, as the Raikage had appointed him and 3 other Junins for a top-secret mission to abduct Hyuga Hinata, the heiress of the Hyuga clan from Konohagakure. Hokori had eagerly accepted the quest, and he could not wait to see the faces of those he considered inferior to him when he would be heralded as Kumo's hero who brought back the powerful Kekkei Genkei, the all-seeing Byakugan, to the village. Their plan to infiltrate Konoha early in the morning had gone without a hitch so far, and they currently had Hyuga Hinata in their possession, all bound and gagged. Their only problem now was how to escape the walls of Konoha undetected, since they were pretty sure the security would be tightened very soon. After all, how long would it take for a hidden village of Konoha's stature to notice one of their clan's heiress was missing from her bed? His other Junin comrades had told Hokori to guard the heiress while hiding in a secluded, bushy area outside of Konoha's training field too. The rest of them would disguise and merge themselves within Konoha's populace to update him of their movements as well as the safest escape route out of the village in the midst of chaos. Hokori had agreed to the idea, though begrudgingly. He hated taking orders from anyone except the Raikage. It made him feel inferior to them somewhat. Nevertheless, as this man grabbed the Hyuga girl, who had somehow regained consciousness and whose futile struggling annoyed him all the way to the place he was supposed to be in hiding, he accidentally stepped on a twig in all his haste, nearly lost his footing and ran into the very bush he had chosen to be his hiding place. It was then Hokori tensed. The noise he created had seemed to attract an unwelcomed visitor, and he quickly left the Hyuga on the grass while hiding himself behind a nearby tree, his heart thumping nervously as he almost expected some Konoha's finest shinobi, the Sharingan no Kakashi for instance, to suddenly step into view. No, Hokori told himself. He was on the cusp of great success, and would be damned to let anyone get in his way. However, he could not believe his luck when it was only a normal-looking, blonde-haired kid whom he judged was not even a genin walked carefully into the vicinity. Hokori watched as the surprised young boy approached his captive, and judging from the fact that this boy seemed to know the Hyuga girl, he must be here to rescue her or something. God, what an idiot. Does he really think he can pull that off? The Kumo shinobi mentally scoffed at the sheer stupidity of the action, barely holding in his amusement while he was at it. Silently, he slipped a kunai from his back pouch and held it in a reverse grip. It was time to act. With the entire of Blonde Boy's attention on his Hyuga friend, Hokori had no problem sneaking behind him, but then the annoying Hyuga girl began to shake her head wildly to warn her friend of his presence. He should have just knocked her unconscious again in the first place, but oh well, never mind that. He could always do it later. Oh, and I was hoping none of you stupid tree huggers would find this place. Hokori drawled, enjoying the surprised reaction from the blonde, watching as the boy's limbs all tensed up in his presence. That felt good. The fear was something he took more than a small amount of pleasure in seeing in his foes. Yes, he felt superior, even if he was facing just an academy student. But it turns out to be just some random brat, oh well. Wasting no time, the Kumo Junin brought the kunai in his hand down towards the boy's neck, intending to finish it quickly after making his dramatic entrance. Well, the look on the Hyuga's face when she saw her friend being stabbed from behind should be quite amusing, Hokori thought quietly to himself, as a sadistic grin graced his lips. He watched as his kunai descend closer and closer to its blonde-haired target, but at the last moment, the boy had moved so suddenly and unexpectedly that his strike had missed the intended vital point, completely. It took him a full second to realize his killing blow had been escaped by an academy student. An academy student? That, impossible. Someone with Hokori's amount of pride could not possibly accept that. His minty green eyes narrowed, he was pissed. No, scratch that, he was very pissed. Naruto winced as he landed some distances away from his attacker, while still keeping Hinata within his sight. It was only sheer reflex that had saved him from taking the worst of the kunai strike, but that did not mean he had escaped the attack unscathed, however. The blonde's right hand was now clutching the upper left of his back where a long, vertical rip could be spotted on his black shirt, the torn cotton exposing a bleeding slash on his skin. The cut was shallow, and although it would not hamper his movements, it still hurt nevertheless. Blocking out the throbbing pain, Naruto took his first glance at the assailant, who appeared to be a young man nearing his 20s. Short but wild, spiky silver hair, mint green eyes which looked slightly slanted at the ends, tanned complexion. This man was just average in height for his age group with a lean build, and over his dark gray top was a flak vest of alabaster white which covered from his left shoulder down to the rest of his upper body. A cross-shaped strap of sorts rested just above each knee over his matching dark pants, and further down, completing the look was a pair of shin guards with vertical red stripes on them. Sunlight glinted off something metallic on the man's forehead, a ninja forehead protector, Naruto quickly noted, and the boy could make out unfamiliar patterns on it which strangely resembled cloud patterns. That alone confirmed his earlier suspicion. This stranger was in no way affiliated with Konoha. Naruto's focus shifted back and forth between this person and Hinata, his eyebrows tightening as he silently contemplated the possible choices of actions at the moment. There had to be something he could do. Since this man was definitely a shinobi, Naruto decided against the idea to just grab Hinata and run. That was too risky for the both of them, but he cared more for his indigo-haired friend than for himself. This only left him with his other options, to stall as long as he could or finding some way to notify the others from the village to this location. At this thought, Naruto swallowed nervously as he glanced at his black chakra weights. This would be the time to release the chakra in them, for he would need all the speed he could get if it came down to fighting. He knew, somehow, that this was one battle that he might not survive, much less win, but Hinata. He would do anything in his power to protect her, his precious friend. It was his promise to himself that he would repay Hinata for her kind deed a year ago, and Uzumaki Naruto made it a point to never break any of his promises. Ever. That was some pretty narrow escape. Naruto's attention turned to Hokori as he started speaking. Despite the man's ire and frustration from earlier, he kept up his smug look, as he constantly did. Some silly beginner's luck, I wonder? But I'm afraid that won't help you much. Who are you? And what are you trying to do to Hinata? The Uzumaki growled, while in his mind he was quietly lowering his chakra weights back to their normal lightness. Naruto watched as the man seemed to ponder about revealing his information for a second, but decided to do it, probably in hopes of intimidating him. Raita Hokori, Junin of Kumogakure, said man introduced himself smugly, not really cared to give away his identity. He decided he was going to kill the brat after all, so it did not matter. That was what he thought, at least. I came to bring the Hyuga brat to Kumo. More like kidnap. Naruto gnashed his teeth, angered by that blatantly obvious statement, but this feeling was soon overtaken by fear. A nervous bead of sweat trailed a path down the side of his face. But if this guy really is a Junin, then, still keeping his eyes glued to the supposed Junin, the boy tried moving his limbs experimentally in secret. He had to check whether the weights had been lifted back to normal, and much to his relief, they did, as he could feel his body getting a lot lighter all of a sudden. Good, I dunno how much this will help me, though. Maybe I should try to keep the talk going. Unfortunately for Naruto, Hokori had something else in mind. Beneath his constantly smug facade, the Kumo nin was actually still seething inside. This academy brat had humiliated him completely earlier, and he was not going to let it slide so easily. Since he was told to wait here for further instructions anyway, using the boy to vent some of his frustration might be able to kill himself some waiting time. Yes, that seemed like a wonderful idea. Now that I've shown myself in the open, I'm afraid I can't let you to leave here alive. Brat. Hokori spread his tongue slowly over his lips, his smirk turning more malicious with each syllable as he thought of all the possible ways he could utterly destroy the boy. Processing an afterthought, he chuckled darkly, and pocketed the kunai he had used earlier back into his tool pouch behind his pants. HMPH, and I won't even need my weapons to do it. With that said, there did not seem to be any way out of this but to fight. Naruto felt a surge of adrenaline. This would be nothing like those friendly spars he had gone through in the academy or with Lee, not with his life now on the line. Naruto bit his lips and kept silent. But he's obviously underestimating me, so maybe. Gathering his courage, the spiky-haired boy steeled himself and slid fluidly into a loose stance he had practiced countless times with Lee, his legs spreading a shoulder's width apart as he brought his right fist in front of his chest, keeping his other ready at his side. Out of the corners of his eyes, Naruto could see Hinata's worried look some distances away, and he gave her a thin smile. "Don't worry, I'll definitely protect you. Whatever happens, no matter what." Hinata's white eyes widened. She could almost hear Naruto saying that to her just then. The blonde was smiling for her, trying to calm her down, trying to chase away her fears. Even in the face of such danger, he was still trying to keep a brave front for her. Though, in her position, she could only hope for the boy's safety, while futilely trying to loosen the ropes around her limbs. Naruto waited and did nothing but keep his eyes locked at the Kumo shinobi for now, as Lee kept telling him during their spars that it would be highly inadvisable to rush headfirst into an adversary whose skills he had no idea about. The spiky-haired boy did not have to wait long, however, as the foreign shinobi wasted the time closing the distance between them. "Stop ignoring me, you cocky little brat." Hokori rushed towards Naruto, obviously angered by the boy's lack of verbal response. He had totally expected the boy to panic and started begging him for mercy earlier, but there he stood in his fighting stance, waiting for him to make a move. It was official. The Kumo nin was furious now. How dare he even think he stands a chance of winning? Naruto dropped low just in time as Hokori's fist sailed over his head, and he instinctively retaliated by bringing his legs around in a sweep. The taller man jumped over it, snorting smugly as usual as he brought his legs down in a dropping axe kick to crush the blonde, but was surprised when his attack was blocked by a quickly made, cross-armed guard that he had not seen coming from an academy student. Even so, Hokori had expected the power behind his kick to crush the boy's guard like nothing, but instead its momentum was held in place by a surprising amount of resistance. Naruto gritted his teeth and grunted under the man's greater weight, the heels of his footwear digging into the ground for added support. At the same time, the blonde was quick to take advantage of Hokori's momentary lapse in concentration, and he pushed forward with everything he got. The sudden action caused the Kumo nin to almost lose his balance as he flipped himself in the air and landed some distance away, his expression one of shock. "A mere brat? Is actually keeping up with me?" Hokori seethed angrily, unable to comprehend the situation at hand. Fine, deep down he knew that taijutsu was not really his forte, but this was infuriating. And what's with that speed? He's much faster than earlier. Meanwhile, Naruto was just as surprised as the kidnapper was, as he looked at his hands in awe and disbelief. "I just did it. I didn't really think about it, and my body just moved." To be perfectly honest, the blonde had expected himself to become a total punching bag to this supposed Junin-level shinobi, but he could somehow feel how his foe would move and was fast enough to respond instinctively. This strength and speed, Naruto had never felt himself so strong and moving so fast throughout his life. Maybe it's because of all the spars I did with Lee? This was not the time to marvel too long at his own growth, however, and Naruto knew it. Feeling buoyed up by this newfound confidence, Naruto quickly settled into a defensive stance, getting ready for the man's next move. Soon, Hokori came charging back and they were locked in fierce combat again, as flurry of physical blows sped between the academy student and supposed Junin. Mostly on the defensive, Naruto's smaller size gave him quite an edge over the larger man as he ducked, twisted and jumped over most of the attacks thrown at him barely at hair's breadth. The blonde must admit, the natural evasiveness his body had unconsciously developed over the years thanks to the ever-pursuing villagers did help a little here. Though, even as nimble as he was, Naruto knew he couldn't keep dodging forever. A couple of sharp blows eventually caught the boy's body as the fight progressed, mainly because of the Kumo nin's greater reach and real combat experience over him. The air was painfully whooshed out from Naruto's lungs as another fist nailed him in the gut, but he was quick to shake off the worst of the pain and kept on moving, never staying on the same spot for any longer than necessary. Although the blue-eyed boy was now sporting some bruises and had yet to score any clean hits against his foe, he was still positively holding his own. In fact, he was starting to see a pattern in the Kumo nin's movements, albeit slowly. Hokori grew more and more frustrated as the fight progressed. No matter how many times he sent the stupid boy sprawling on the ground, he would just keep getting back up. The sheer tenacity of his was really starting to grate Hokori's nerves to the next level. What was the boy trying so hard for? Couldn't he see that he was just delaying his inevitable defeat in the end? What would it take to break him? You stupid brat, stop trying to act so tough. Why won't you just give up already? Because that's the one thing I'm worst at doing. Naruto leveled a fierce glare at his opponent, blue eyes gleaming with unwavering resolve. I'll never give up. What rubbish, Hokori thought as he, once again, brought the boy down with a harsh kick to the chest. Reflexively catching himself on one hand, Naruto barely bit back a wince as jagged stones met his palm abrasively, the boy quickly rolling out of the way of a heavy stomp and lashing a leg out at the same time in an attempt to catch the man off guard with another sweeping move. Inexperienced in real fights he might be, but Naruto knew an opening when he saw one. Now, useless, like that's gonna work. The shinobi jumped to avoid the offending appendage easily like the first time, only for his green eyes to grow wide with surprise. In mid-air, no further than a few inches below his current position with a fist cocked back, was the brat. Naruto had redirected all his momentum from earlier and suddenly leapt upwards at that very moment Hokori did, as if having predicted it to happen. Teeth clenching tightly, the blonde had a sheer look of dogged determination as lashed his fist forward with every ounce of strength he could muster. What this little, the Kumo nin swore incoherently under his breath. He could not possibly dodge it in his current position in midair, not to mention the initial shock had taken away his time to have a guard prepared. It was far too late to do anything now. No, the brat couldn't possibly hide. And hit it did, with a resounding whack. The fierce uppercut connected solidly against Hokori's jaw, clanking his teeth painfully together and knocking the breath out of him. The force behind Naruto's fist sent the Kumo nin sailing up the air for a brief moment, before landing unceremoniously on his backside. That punch had hurt. There's no way, he screamed inside his mind. There's no freaking way this is actually happening. The blonde's heart did a great leap inside his chest. His first hit. He had finally landed his first hit. He could do this. Taking this chance to catch his breath, Naruto winced as he wiped a fist over the corner of his bloodied lips. Much to his worry, the fatigue from his training prior to finding Hinata and all the fighting was slowly kicking in. Sweat trailed down the boy's forehead in rivulets as his ruined black shirt followed the slightly labored heaving of his chest. Naruto knew his torso was likely a discolored mess of black and purple under the cotton, but the blonde-haired boy stood valiantly nevertheless, keeping a watchful eye over his friend in case the Kumo nin decided to play dirty by grabbing her and run. Little did he know, Hokori was planning to do something akin to that soon. You, damn brat, now you've really done it. The prideful, silver-haired man got up from his awkward position from the ground, his fists shaking and eyes murderous as he glared openly at the boy who had continuously humiliated him until now. Though, as he took in the genuine concern the boy held for the Hyuga heiress, a menacing grin began to work its way onto his lips as his eyes gleamed maliciously. Yes, the girl. She'll be the perfect bait. Dead set on carrying out whatever plan he had in mind, Hokori rummaged his back pouch, and Naruto could see 2 kunai blades being pulled out of it. This set off several alarms in the latter's mind as he immediately went on guard, not liking the looks in the man's eyes. Like a coiled spring, the boy's muscles tensed in preparation as he readied himself to react to whatever tricks the man had in store for him. So much about not using weapons. Naruto gritted his teeth. Being only a second-year academy student, he did not have any weapons on his person, much less the necessary knowledge to wield them properly. This is bad. This is really, really bad. Then, without any warning, the metallic blades were thrown forcefully forward, and Naruto couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. They seemed to be heading towards somewhere else instead of him, but where? Blue eyes following and roughly tracing their trajectories as they speared through the air. The blonde felt fear gripping his insides upon realizing who the Kumo nin's real target was. Hinata. There was simply no time for anything else. Naruto's legs were already in motion the moment that thought registered, the boy shooting off running faster than he had thought possible towards the girl in question, completely heedless of the aching protests from his own wounds as he did. The blonde hoped he would be in time. No, he had to be in time or he would never be able to forgive himself. Everything around him seemed to crawl at a snail's pace as he watched. Unable to take his eyes off the two kunais as they slowly zeroed in their desired mark, the blades glinting dangerously under the sunlight. It almost looked like the steel were eager to meet flesh. "Please!" Naruto screamed desperately inside his head, his feet kicking off the ground in mid-sprint as he, with reckless abandon, hurled himself towards the empty space between his friend and the oncoming projectiles of death. "Please let me make it. Naruto-kun, no, don't come any closer. Run away." Hinata squeezed her eyes tightly shut from her position, hoping the blades would somehow miss the both of them, or miss Naruto, at least. The boy had done more than enough for her until now. She did not want to see him getting himself hurt for her anymore. In moments like this, Hinata truly hated herself for being so weak. If only she could free herself from the tight ropes restraining her movements. For a chilling moment that felt like eternity, everything went dead quiet, and then... Hinata's eyes grew wide in silent horror the next time she opened them. Her worst fears were confirmed before her very sight. Pain, white-hot pain took over Naruto's senses as soon as two solid thump reached his ears. The wickedly sharp tools had bitten deeply into his upper back while he was still in mid-air, the brunt of the damage eliciting a strangled cry from the boy. Stars soon exploded all around Naruto's vision when gravity regained its hold on him, sending the 10-year-old crashing face first into the ground. Naruto hissed and writhed in agony as he clawed at the earth with trembling fingers. His struggles gradually weakened to small twitches before he seemingly stayed unmoving altogether. Kahahaha. I knew he'd fall for it. Hokori took in the absolute horrified look on Hinata's face, who now had tears spilling freely out of her eyes as she could only watch helplessly at Naruto's prone form. The shinobi threw his head back and laughed openly in mad glee at the sight of blood slowly seeping over the boy's ruined shirt, giving it a darker shade of black. Hokori mentally patted himself on the shoulder for a plan well executed, fully thinking the annoying brat was finally dead. "You fool! Even if you let them hit the heiress, the worst they'd do were a couple of scars on her pretty face." How absolutely stup. That was then he felt it. He had just made the biggest mistake in his life by saying that. Hokori's gloating laughter died abruptly inside his throat as the air around him was weighed down by an overwhelming, suffocating curtain of raw killing intent. He spun wildly to determine the source, only to find that it was emanating from the supposedly dead academy student. What was worse, the bulk of the murderous sensation seemed to be directed at him, and it had almost made him lose his footing and fell on his rear for the second time in the same morning. A sense of absolute dread began to pervade his senses. What is this feeling? Barely maintaining an upright posture, Hokori watched, fearfully as a thin but visible layer of ominous red chakra slowly spread over the downed boy's body like a flaming blanket, and a second later, said boy was slowly getting up, his fingernails slightly elongated and sharpened at the tips. The two kunais from earlier were still stuck firmly onto his back, but he showed no signs of even registering to the pain. You even tried hurting Hinata," Naruto said through gritted teeth, his voice coming out almost like a feral growl by the end of it. Rage, pure and thick unlike anything else he had felt before, flooded his senses, to the point that it felt as if his blood were boiling. Fingers curled into tight fists, so tightly that they drew blood from his palms as the blonde turned around and threw his head up, meeting the Kumo kidnapper dead in the eyes. Naruto was so angry that his fists were shaking too much for him to hold them steady. Hokori gaped, horrified as he took in the boy's facial changes. Naruto's blonde hair bristled wildly to give itself an even spikier definition, the whisker marks on his cheeks became more pronounced than before, and his canines grew in length until they poked against his bottom lips. Though, none of these came even close in comparison to the features which had undergone the most drastic of changes, his eyes. They were no longer their gentle blue hues, now having replaced by two vicious crimson irises with dark vertical slits as the pupils. It felt as if the Shinigami himself was glaring right through his soul. Cold sweat washed over Hokori like a bucket of ice down his back. For just a brief moment, he could have sworn he saw the fiery chakra coalesced into a beast-like form with 2 rows of razor-sharp teeth. It was a terrifying sight which filled him with an undefinable feeling of fear. The Kumo nin did not move, no, he could not move, and he felt as if every of his muscles were rooted to the spot by this horrible sensation. What the hell is this brat? And this chakra? What is this power? A keke genke? No. Hokori began to panic, and then his eyes went wide as if a sudden realization had sunk in. Don't tell me this stupid brat is. Quote. I'll kill you, you bastard. Twirling crimson chakra exploded all around the boy's body like living flame, and Naruto's ferocious roar, imbued with his anger as well as rolling waves of massive killing intent, sent an arc of shockwave reverberating across the area. The invisible blast blew up loose earth fragments along with stray leaves with great force, and it had almost taken Hokori everything to stop himself from toppling over, the man taking a small involuntary step back in fear. Though, in that desperate moment, the Kumo shinobi's survival instincts seemed to kick in. He somehow managed to regain some feelings in his hands, as he shakily reached into the equipment pouch behind his back. Don't you dare screw with me. Hokori yelled with panic, all his earlier smugness forgotten as he flung a fistful of shurikens wildly at the blonde despite his still shaking appendages, as if hoping it would be enough to strike him down by some stroke of miracle. You're just a stupid half-dead brat, nothing more. Die. Unblinkingly, Naruto did not even bother evading as the metallic stars came whirling by, their sharp edges dragging a series of nasty cuts on his left cheek and shredding his dirt-encrusted shirt to ribbons at the shoulders, before lodging onto a tree trunk a short distance behind. That did nothing at all to save Hokori from his current situation. If anything, it only served to fuel Naruto's rage even more, now with the blonde's demeanor darkening several shades, fangs bared in a terrible snarl of fury as he crouched on all fours. And then he was gone. In one powerful red-black blur of explosive motion, the blonde had literally launched himself forward like some sort of frenzied animal, and Hokori leapt away just in the nick of time to see a chakra-coated fist slamming down the earth where he had been standing a second ago. He considered himself extremely lucky to have evaded it then. The raw power behind the blow was incredible, if the sound of cracks extending from the point of impact, a fist-sized crater, was any indication. However, when the curtain of dust thinned down, the boy was nowhere in sight. That was definitely something to worry about. Darn it. Hokori cursed when his eyes caught a red blur of movement, but there was a new problem. The flickering crimson seemed to have quickly multiplied in number as it closed in around him from almost every direction. The man was not sure whether his eyes were playing tricks on him, but now was not the time to be thinking about it. Biting his lips, he forced his shaking hands into motion, as he quickly started weaving through hand seals in preparation for one of the most powerful, area-wide ninjutsu in his arsenal to take care of this mess. This is bad. I have to end this quickly. Bluish-white sparks of standard lightning chakra gathered and arced across his fingers as he did, and the Kumo nin knew he was almost done with the necessary sequence. However, before he could even think of launching the attack, or better yet, before he could even finish his last couple of hand seals for the matter, Raita Hokori found himself being sent careening, full force across solid earth when his world exploded into a white haze of pain merely 1 second later. The very same red chakra had stretched like a bubblegum and blindsided him from an almost impossible angle, the sudden impact causing his half-completed jutsu to quickly lose form before dispersing harmlessly as if it were just a bunch of cheap fireworks. The malicious red energy surrounding Naruto seemed to have a mind of its own, and Hokori simply did not see that coming until it was all too late. I am impossible. I couldn't even, said man gritted his teeth, reeling in pain as his body finally skidded to a stop after several meters away, with him now sprawling awkwardly on his back. Mint green eyes glazed over with a mixture of shock and disbelief. It almost felt as if he was hit by an entire sack of concrete bricks, his white Junin vest giving in and barely cushioning the blow. But he was given no time to think or react. Like how an angry cat would pounce on its prey, the boy was right upon him in the next second, one fist raised and growling in a low rumble. If the initial strike had been painful, then the follow-up punches were 3 times as damaging compared to that. The supposed Junin soon found himself barely stifling his screams and coughing up blood as he took another punch to his chest, then another to his chin, then another, and another. Each blow much heavier than the last as the boy unleashed his righteous fury on him. Never forgive. People like you, I will never forgive. Even when his knuckles began to hurt and were speckled with blood, Naruto did not let up. The boy punched and punched, throwing his fists forward as hard as he could and shouting with dark rage even when his voice became hoarse. Even when his arms shook tiredly with the exertion. None of these mattered right now. His mind only registered a single thought. This man had tried inflicting harm upon one of his most precious people. And he would make him pay. At this rate. Hokori wanted to escape so very badly, but all his limbs just would not move. This whole situation was so unreal. He was supposed to be the one doing the beating here, not getting his living snot beaten out of him by some wet behind the ears academy brat. Though, that was beside the point now. It was not like the foreign ninja could bear the pain any longer. No, I don't want to die like this. Stop, monster. Stop it, no. The man had finally forsaken all his pride, his lips parting almost on its own accord to howl in desperation as he saw Naruto cocked a bloodied fist backwards, obviously preparing for the finishing blow. It was as clear as day to anyone that the boy had pumped a lot of power into this particular strike. His entire fist was literally set ablaze with thick wisps of the crimson chakra. Monster. That one word stopped Naruto cold. His fist trembled and hovered a mere inch away from the man's already battered face from the earlier pummeling, and he froze. Numbly watching Hokori for the moment as the man half scrambled, half crawled a few steps away from him. Naruto seemed to have snapped out of whatever trance he had entered. The boy's senses slowly came back to him, his resolve crumbled and fierce expression faltered. What have I almost done? Naruto stared, wide-eyed at his visibly shaking hands, parts of them now caked with blood. But, more importantly, the blonde boy quickly whipped his attention back to Hinata, whom he noticed was looking somewhat fearfully at him right now. Is she afraid of me? All the strength left his body as soon as it came, as Naruto's breathing turned into erratic gasping. Almost in slow motion, the blonde watched as his own body hit the ground hard in a dazed heap, first with his knees buckling under his weight like wet noodles, followed by his shoulders, and finally one of his cheeks soon met the unwelcoming cold earth beneath him with a painful thump. The red chakra faded away from view, and his whisker marks receded to their normally thin lines. The blonde's eyes flickered disconcertingly between crimson and cerulean until their natural colors once again regained their full dominance, the angry slits returning to round pupils. Naruto was in shambles. His muscles had never felt so worn out, and he could not move. In fact, he could barely breathe. His lungs simply burned with the effort as if they were set on fire, not to mention every single wound on his person, particularly the kunai-inflicted ones, chose this moment to remind him of their presence. Copious amount of sweat ran freely down his face and skin as if he had run 50 laps around the entire of Konoha. GGHK. My body feels so heavy. Though unsure of what had happened in the last few seconds, Hokori decided to take this chance to recover some of his wounded pride. Almost zombie-like, he clambered to his feet, and wobbled unevenly towards the now vulnerable and exhausted blonde, a gleaming kunai in hand. Blue eyes half shutting closed due to obvious fatigue, Naruto could only watch in sheer helplessness as the man inched closer and closer to him, his bladed weapon raised shakily in preparation for a last-ditch, overhead strike to the neck. A pained hiss escaped the blonde's throat as he strained to push himself up, but his body simply refused to even lift an inch off the ground. Not that that would stop him from keep trying to coax life into any of his limbs, but still, none of his efforts were working. There was simply no way in dodging this. He could hardly muster the strength to even lift a finger at the moment. Things were not looking good for him. Not good at all. I can't give up here. Gotta get up. Naruto gnashed his teeth together, gasping feebly for breath and wincing as every little spasm of his muscles sent sharp pinpricks of numbing pain lancing through his senses. Ove. Even just a little bit. Move. Please move. Hey. I've completely underestimated you, you damn brat. But, even if I failed to deliver the Hyuga back to Kumo, hey. Hokori wheezed, a crazed grin forming on his lips as his breathing grew heavier by the second. Time seemed to grind to a halt as the Kumo nin's metallic weapon descended in a deadly arc towards its intended target. I'll at least get rid of Konoha's Jin. Hake Kusho. 8 trigrams vacuum palm. It happened so quickly. An intense burst of pressure came whistling through the air and struck the Kumo shinobi before he even knew it. and he was literally sent soaring backwards until his body crashed into the bulk of the nearest tree in the area with a sickeningly loud noise. Hokori slid down the wood bonelessly a second later, like a puppet bereft of strings. A series of painful coughs from the now gasping shinobi was the only indication that he was still alive, but definitely in no condition to fight back anytime soon. Still shocked from the close call, Naruto watched as a tall figure with the same white eyes Hinata possessed Shunshin ed into view, his right arm extended and palm facing outward. The man's long black hair flowed smoothly in the gentle air current. "That is for kidnapping my daughter," Hyuga Hiyashi stated frostily as he glared at the downed shinobi with cold fury in his eyes that promised a lot of pain. "Be grateful that Hokage-sama requires you to be captured alive, or I would have killed you immediately for your foolishness." Daughter. Then that guy with white eyes. Must be Hinata's Two-chan. Naruto could feel relief flooding inside him despite his heaving breaths. His worry about this man being another enemy quickly melted away as he processed that statement. Sandane Gigi must have somehow found out about this place. Thank goodness. More footsteps were heard approaching the area quickly, some of them belonging to a troop of masked Konoha Anbu and others he could not recognize. Naruto fought hard to stay conscious, but it was proving difficult. He vaguely heard several urgent cries of what sounded like medic towards his direction, but before he could observe the scene any longer, his vision began to sway and darken around the edges as the shapes before him became increasingly blurry by each passing second. It would seem exhaustion had finally taken its toll, as the encroaching dizziness consumed Naruto's mind, and everything went black. Some distance away, in the Konoha forest, unbeknownst to all of them in the scene, another mysterious individual was observing the entire fight from afar, though his pair of round, curious yellow eyes. This person with short, grass-green hair looked most unusual from a first sight's glance, with a pair of large, darker green Venus flytrap-like extensions that enveloped his entire upper body, opening just wide enough for anyone to see his head. His uniqueness did not end there, however, as his skin showed an even split of differently colored halves. The left half was completely white, while the other half was a contrasting pitch black with only his yellow iris being the only thing visible. But the most disturbing part about this individual was that the two halves seemed to be conversing with each other. I must admit, that was pretty interesting," the white half said with an amused, laid-back tone, "and it seems that we have identified the last of the Jinchuriki, too. Never thought he'd be someone as young as the Ichibi's container." "It would seem that way," his other black half spoke in return without even moving his lips, in a throaty, no-nonsense voice which made his mysterious aura to stand out even more, a complete opposite of his other half. "We must notify him of this development. Yeah, let's go. And hopefully we can find something to eat along the way, too." Without making any noise at all, the massive jaw-like extensions snapped shut around the person's head and upper body completely, and he began sinking into the very tree he was observing from. The whole process only took no more than a few seconds, and he was gone from view, leaving behind absolutely no traces that there had been anyone in the area a moment ago. Breathing. Naruto could hear faint noises of someone breathing gently beside him, but he could not identify who it was at the moment. Wait, or maybe he was just imagining things? The boy was not sure. The acrid smell of something akin to antiseptics and other wound disinfectants assaulted his nostrils. Slowly, our favorite blonde regained his consciousness. My head. A splitting headache was the first thing he became aware of, one which made him feel as if his brain were trying to burst out of his skull. On top of that, his body, particularly his back, was aching uncomfortably. Ignoring the sore feeling as best as he could, Naruto gulped down his saliva to at least moist his dried throat, and he was thankful as the headache slowly left him. With sluggish effort, blue eyes fluttered themselves open, but their owner immediately regretted the action as the world started to spin in a sudden wave of vertigo. Slowly, the 10-year-old mentally told himself as closed his eyes, before gradually opening them again when he was ready. Naruto squinted woozily against the sudden brightness that assaulted his vision, but as he did, the foggy images before him began to get clearer and sharper. White. And lot of white. Where? A spotless white ceiling was the first thing that greeted his eyes, and he was lying with his back on something similarly white but warm and soft and squishy, a bed, he quickly realized, but definitely not his. Naruto had to fight down a moment of panic as he made a fast look down at himself, taking note that he was bare from his waist up, and was clothed in only a pair of disposable shorts at the moment. A loose feeling around his toes, wrists and ankles told him he was most likely bare of any footwear as well, and that his training weights had been stripped off him, too, probably placed somewhere in the room. Bandages swathed around his forehead, the same white material also covering most of his chest and extending around his upper back. A sticky sensation made Naruto realize the presence of a square medical gauze on one of his cheeks, with band-aids taping securely over the material in a crisscross fashion. More of them were littering some areas of his arms as well as his knees underneath the blanket, which again, were pure white in color. Tilting his head slowly and as best as he could from his position, Naruto glanced about with slight difficulty, taking in more details of his surroundings. Everything else was either the same boring shade of white or gray. The white curtain was open to reveal that it was still bright outside, and he could faintly make out the sounds of birds fluttering beyond the window. Off to his right was a small nightstand with an even smaller white vase set on top of it, filled with what he could see as purple lilac flowers. Naruto was no floral expert himself, but they were beautiful. And beside the table, sitting on a wooden stool next to his bandage-clad form was a person? It was an indigo-haired girl, and she was someone he knew quite well. She looked worried and slightly tired, her white eyes seemingly out of focus, and she did not react when he looked at her. She must have been here for quite a while. Naruto concluded, a warm feeling engulfing his chest. It was nice to know that someone was actually there for him. Said girl was still garbed in her same clothing, with parts of the once clean fabric still slightly streaked with dirt. Naruto's cerulean orbs widened in remembrance as memories came rushing back to his mind. He remembered he was training, how he had found this girl all tied up behind the bush, how he had fought tooth and nail with the Junin from Kumo, the fuzzy memory about a strange red chakra, the arrival of help, and then. He grimaced as the pounding headache began to come back. He could not remember anything else. Hi, ta. Naruto croaked weakly. His voice was still hoarse and barely audible from disuse, but it was enough. It had jolted the Hyuga heiress out from whatever she was thinking, as she bolted up from her seat and looked at his bandage-clad form, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. Naruto-kun. Hinata gasped, and she was quickly by the boy's side. You're awake. How, ing. Naruto tried to continue speaking, but without much success as his throat chose this moment to go into a coughing fit. Noticing this, Hinata quickly filled an empty glass with drinking water from a canteen, before carefully helping the blonde-haired boy to a sitting position against the backboard of his bed. She felt a pang of guilt when Naruto winced, the extra effort pulling on his wounds. You're in the Konoha hospital, Naruto-kun. And you've been unconscious for almost 5 hours, Hinata informed him, holding the cool glass near to his mouth. Here, have some water, it'll help. 5 hours? I've been out for that long? Naruto asked himself the question as he took a small sip, swallowing eagerly as the wonderfully cool liquid cleared his throat and refreshed him somewhat. He turned and gave Hinata a weak grin he could manage at the moment. Thanks. Then, his demeanor morphed into one of genuine relief, matching the Hyuga heiress as she put the glass away. Hinata, I'm so glad you're okay. Thank goodness. Hinata's eyes widened at Naruto's words. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The boy had thrown himself in harm's way to protect her and gotten himself all banged up, yet he was still more concerned on her well-being rather than his own. He had just woken up just barely a minute ago, for goodness sake. Feeling her tears were threatening to spill forth, what Hinata did next in the next second was something she never believed she had the courage to do. Naruto's eyes widened exponentially in surprise when Hinata suddenly leaned forward, the girl embracing him in a tight hug, and sobbing openly onto his uninjured left shoulder. The blonde felt his breath stopped short inside his chest as he flinched slightly at the sudden motion, but otherwise he did not move. What? Naruto began to panic as her tears fell silently and splattered onto his bandages. Several emotions began to swirl in the boy's mind. Although his wounded back protested as she hugged him, Naruto was simply too concerned about his friend to care. Hinata? Why? The blonde-haired boy blurted frantically, confusion evident in his facial features. He looked totally clueless on why Hinata had reacted in such a manner. Was it something I said? He wondered, a sense of worry worming through his insides. Unbeknownst to Naruto himself, his heart rate was quickening and he was feeling quite warm in the cheeks from the sudden close contact, unfamiliar with the new feeling. Why are you crying? You didn't get hurt or anything, right? Right? Instead of calming her, his words ended up having the opposite effect. Hinata only sobbed louder, and Naruto took it as something else as his expression grew increasingly panicked by the second. Wah! What should I say or do? In the end, the blonde quickly settled on the first thing that popped into his mind at the moment. I know. That bad ninja must have said something mean to you. Wait till I get my hands on H. That's not it. Hinata nearly shouted, and Naruto was once again taken aback for the second time as she released the hug, her tear-streaked, pale white eyes looking directly into his blue ones. Then her voice softened, almost to a murmur, but it only lasted for her first sentence before her now trembling voice slowly picked up in volume again. That's not it. I may be all right since I was needed alive, but Naruto-kun, what about you? The shinobi was AJ Junin. You could have died. And yet, you put yourself into danger for me, and now you're still worried about me even when it was all because of me that you got hurt in the first place. There was a few seconds of ensuing silence. Naruto could only stare with his mouth agape as he processed the lengthy speech. Hinata. She's crying because I got hurt? On the other end, Hinata looked absolutely horrified upon realizing what she had just done. She was nearly yelling at Naruto. And now she was fairly certain he would be angry at her. Head ducking down and raising her index fingers to twiddle in her embarrassment, Hinata decided to quickly apologize, hoping that would not ruin their friendship in any way. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to. Hee, don't you worry about it. Naruto smiled brightly at her, not at all affected by her outburst. He looked into Hinata's unbelieving white eyes and grinned, for my precious people. I'll always try my hardest to keep them safe, no matter what. And I won't die before I make everyone in this village acknowledge me. You can count on it. Aye. Hinata found herself at a loss of words, and her next sentence came up barely in a whisper as sobs once again racked her voice as she embraced the blonde for the second time in the day, harder this time and once again surprising to the boy and even herself. Thank you, for everything. Thank you. Next time, Naruto-kun, she told herself. Next time, I'll be the one protecting you. I promise. That's a little too tight, Hinata. ACKK. Ow. Naruto made a face due to the pain, though he still managed a sheepish grin as Hinata quickly, but gently released her hug, her face a shade of red as she wiped away her tears. Sorry. Ahem. Both Naruto and Hinata turned to the door as a new presence. No, actually two new presences decided to make themselves known. Hinata's already flushed face from hugging the blonde earlier turned beet red as she realized who had decided to come in for a visit, hoping they had not seen her little act. From the looks of it, it would seem they had not. Hokage-sama, Oto-sama. Hinata greeted politely as the duo nodded in equal politeness in return and made their way towards her and the blonde-haired boy, getting themselves seated on the empty stools nearby. Naruto quickly noticed the wizened Sandaime, of course, as the ever-flowing, white Hokage robe and hat with the character of fire on it were not easy for anyone to miss by. The other man, however, Naruto could only recognize him from memory. Clothed in traditional, loose-fitting white gi with a brown haori draped over his sloping shoulders, this man was exactly the same person who had come to his rescue few hours prior, with his smooth, long black hair and of course, the signature white eyes that all Hyuga clan members seemed to possess. Unlike the Hokage, Hiyashi wore a stoic expression, outwardly projecting an air of seriousness around him which unnerved Naruto somewhat. Sandaime Gigi. Hinata's Tuchan. Naruto was never too familiar with formalities, but nevertheless he decided to be polite, as he tried to at least give a light bow. The sudden movement only caused more pain to his still stiff neck, evident when his face contorted into a grimace. Though it lasted only for a split second, that did not go unseen by the other three occupants in the small room as they immediately looked at him in concern. Be at ease, Uzumaki-san. There's no need for such formalities. The man's stoic-looking expression softened somewhat. Inwardly, he was still surprised at how casually Naruto addressed their village leader, if his unconsciously raised eyebrows as he studied the boy were any indication. "And as you have known, I am Hinata's father, Hyuga Hiyashi. But more importantly, how are you feeling?" "Well, I'm okay, I guess." Naruto was still taken aback by the formal calling of his name, and was unsure of how to answer such a simple question. "My back still hurts a little, but that aside, I'm pretty much fine." Hiyashi nodded curtly. The man turned to the Hokage, receiving a nod from the aged shinobi as well, as he returned his attention to Naruto. From what Naruto could tell, both of the adults in the room had something to say to him, but the Sandame was allowing Hiyashi to speak up first. For the slightest moment, the blonde boy wondered how the two of them realized he was up, but decided to wave away the thought. Probably some medic who happened to walk past his room saw it and informed the rest of them. "Uzumaki-san, there is something I wish to tell you myself." The elder Hyuga paused for a moment, and Naruto really began to get all nervous from the formal tone. His mind began to think of all the possible things that Hinata's father might say, from being angry at him for being friends with Hinata and many other crazy thoughts. Nevertheless, he had no choice but to listen to what the clan head had to say. Naruto swallowed hard, and nodded as best as his current condition could allow. What he heard and saw next was something he had never expected from a clan head like Hyuga Hiyashi. "Thank you for protecting my daughter." Hiyashi stood up, looked into his eyes, and promptly bowed deeply. Naruto, for his part, could only gape, in a rather comical way too, with his eyes widening into perfect discs of astonishment. The Hyuga, one of the most powerful clan in Konoha, and its clan head no less, was actually bowing at him. The Sandame could barely hold back a chuckle as he looked at Naruto's reaction. It brought back a wave of nostalgia, as the wizened shinobi remembered it was the exact same reaction shown to him by a certain blonde-haired Hokage when he first appointed him to take his place. "From today onward, the entire of Hyuga clan is forever in your debt." Naruto did not reply. No, he did not know how to reply. Hinata, he noticed, was shocked as well. It had been ages since she had seen his father bowing to anyone except the Hokage. Naruto must have really gained his respect. Speaking of who, the blonde-haired boy's mouth moved, trying in vain to form words. It was only a few seconds later that he found his voice back, as he blurted what he had in mind. But I didn't beat him." "Well, you did," he finished lamely. "That may be so," was Hiyashi's calm response, as he once again looked at him with a more, casual expression by a Hyuga's standard or course. "But had you not been there by Hinata's side at that time, the kidnapping would have probably been a success, I'm afraid." "Huh?" Naruto was definitely confused now, and seeing his puzzled look, the Hyuga clan head decided to elaborate further. "The shinobi you fought against, Uzumaki-san, had a few of his accomplices hiding around Konoha to monitor our reactions and secure a safe route out of Konoha's walls in the midst of chaos. With the help of the Sandame Sama himself, the Anbu as well as some of our Aburame and Inazuka comrades, we were able to track down and subdue them." Naruto only nodded in silence as he digested the gist of the information, and Hiyashi took this as a sign to continue. "Now, had you not been there and stalled the Kumo Nin long enough, the fool would have definitely suspected something was wrong when none of his accomplices were coming, and then tried to escape with Hinata on his own. For preventing that, I once again thank you, Uzumaki-san." Realization dawned upon Naruto's face as the gears in his mind began working. That definitely made sense. He had been wondering quite a while why the Kumo Nin had not just grabbed Hinata and made a mad dash for it when he first spotted him, and instead choosing to stay for a fight with an academy student like him. Though, this only meant he was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time, but the compliment did make him flush in embarrassment when he felt warm from a surge of acknowledgement rising in his chest, however. "Hee. You're welcome." Naruto could not help but grin in response, the boy's ears turning slightly pink as he scratched his whisker-marked cheeks with an abashed expression in play. "And, you can just call me Naruto." "Very well. Then no, Naruto-san, I have one question for you." Okay?" Naruto nodded slowly, not knowing of any other ways of responding. And the question was asked out of the blue. "What do you think of my daughter Hinata?" At this, several things happened simultaneously. The Sandame raised an eyebrow in interest. "Hinata? Well, she looked so red in the face that Naruto would have thought she was having a high fever, and Hiyashi looked expectantly at the bandaged boy, his eyes studying him with untold amount of anticipation. "Well?" Naruto began, his whiskered face looking thoughtful as he took time recalling about all the time he had known Hinata. A smile slowly etched itself on his face as he remembered how they first made friends, and it only stretched wider when he thought of how she had helped him in the academy classes. Hinata looked even more nervous than before, she was about to fall unconscious any moment now. The boy flashed them a face-splitting grin as he finally got his answer ready. "Hinata's. Well, she's a bit on the shy side, but is really kind, caring and always helps me out in my studies whenever I ask her. It's really lucky of me to have met her, she's a really great friend." Hinata blushed deeper at the compliments, though Naruto did not notice it as he was looking at Hiyashi right now. The man nodded curtly at the boy's sincere reply, and a few seconds of silence stretched between the two before his lips contorted into something remotely resembling a small smile. "I see. Well, that would be all I wanted to know for now. I believe Hokage-sama has something to talk to you about as well, so I'll be taking my leave." Hiyashi saw the aged shinobi gave him a nod, and he stood up from his seat, turning to his daughter and gesturing her to follow. "Hinata, come, you need to rest as well. Once again, I thank you, Naruto-san." Hinata nodded in response and followed after her father, but not before turning back and took a last glance at her blonde friend. "Get well soon, Naruto-kun." "I will, thanks. And see ya in the academy tomorrow." Hearing the door closed behind them, Naruto turned to his last visitor at the moment. The Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, made doubly sure that they were the only ones left, before making rapid hand seals which were too fast for Naruto's still inexperienced eyes to follow. And when the elderly man was done, Naruto could feel a thin pulse of chakra enshrouding the entire room. "Gigi?" Naruto prompted, confusion evident on his features. He tensed slightly. "What's going on?" "I've activated the privacy seals in this room," the aged leader said. Earlier, before he entered the room with Hiyashi, he had stationed 2 of his personal Anbu guards outside the room to prevent anyone from interrupting their conservation here, and hopefully stop the villagers before they would think of any more of their foolish schemes to get the boy while he was vulnerable. Now no one outside would be able to hear us. Naruto only nodded, as he only knew so little about sealing arts. If the Sandaime was this serious in preserving privacy around them, what he was going to tell him next must be something pretty big. He swallowed nervously and glanced about, before looking at his grandfather-esque figure. Am I in trouble?" Hiruzen lifted an amused eyebrow, having not expected anything like that. "No, not in the slightest, Naruto. I've heard the general story from young Hinata," he chuckled, noticing Naruto's troubled look, and decided to lighten the mood at least for a bit, the proud smile never leaving his lips. Then, his aged expression morphed into one of curiosity. "But can you, pray tell me what you were doing at training ground 2 that early in the morning?" "I was doing some training by myself." Naruto decided to go with the straightforward version of truth, but he chose not to disclose what kinds of training he was doing. Parts of him felt somewhat guilty hiding away the fact that he was practicing his water ninjutsu in secret before he even graduated as a genin from the academy. Though, that thought reminded him that he had totally forgotten about his Suiden jutsu in the heat of his first and most recent fight against a real shinobi. "But then, I thought I heard some really strange noise outside the field, so I went to check it out. And that's how I found Hinata." There was a short silence as Hiruzen regarded the boy's words. "I see," was his curt reply, his wizened smile still present on his facial features. "So that's what happened." Years of experience told Hiruzen that the blonde was being honest even if he was leaving something out about his training, so he did not attempt to prod any further on the matter. After all, it was totally understandable for a shinobi, or in Naruto's case, a future shinobi, to keep his training details to himself as long as he did not place his comrades or the village in danger. And considering Naruto's nature, the blonde would do anything but those. There was something else tugging on the aged Hokage's mind, anyway. Something more urgent. Something that he really needed to find out so he could help Naruto, whom he had treated like his own grandson all this while. The Sandaime's face grew genuinely concerned as he continued, "Naruto, there's another thing that I need you to tell me. And please, tell me exactly what you know. Can you do that?" Naruto swallowed as he mentally went back to his recent fight in his mind. It did not take him long to make a pretty good guess on where the current conversation was heading. At this, Naruto's small smile faded, as his gentle blue hues looked worriedly into those of the older man. It's got something to do about the red chakra, right? The Sandaime nodded, his expression turned oddly solemn. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage sighed inwardly as he took in the worried expression of the boy he considered as his second grandson. Such a look did not suit him at all. The village leader knew the day would come when he had to reveal the secret to Naruto. It was bound to happen at some point, but this was much earlier than he had anticipated. Though, before he would start spilling the beans, Hiruzen decided he still had a question for him. Naruto, he began, gaining the blonde's attention as he turned his blue eyes to him. Can you tell me exactly what happened back then, when you started seeing this red chakra around you? Naruto's eyes lost their glimmer again as he inwardly faltered at the question. He did not quite know how to set about telling his grandfather figure, but he knew he was only trying to help. Inhaling deeply, the boy began digging through his memory, and tried explaining as best as he could. Hinata. I mean, when the bad ninja said he was trying to hurt Hinata, I got angry, so angry I just wanted to beat him up real badly. The blue-eyed boy started out in a little more than a whisper as he took another deep breath, slowly recalling the rest of the fight as he did so. And then, Naruto winced and subconsciously pressed a hand to his forehead, feeling the pounding headache return as he tried searching deeper into his memories for more details. Easy now, don't push yourself too hard. Take as long as you need, the Sandaime cautioned, his wizened facial features softened in understanding. Naruto was still recovering, after all. Casting the boy a concerned look, he further offered, or perhaps you want to tell me when you feel better. No, it's okay. I want to keep going. Naruto shook his head lightly, feeling he should really get this off his chest. A part of him really wanted to know more behind the red chakra, and somehow he could tell that the Sandaime might know something about it. Steeling himself, Naruto continued, nervousness lacing his voice. And then, I felt something inside me just snapped. Hiruzen felt the creases on his forehead tightened, but nevertheless gave a slight inclination of his head at Naruto's explanation so far. The 10-year-old took this as a sign to keep going. I felt so strong, it's like I could take on anything back then. And I only got angrier when I got my hands on him, even after I lashed out with everything I had. Naruto's gaze fell onto his now fisted hands which were clenching the bedsheet a little too tightly, his tone sinking to a near whisper as he continued. But what's worse, he cut himself off and breathed in deeply. A part of me felt like I was actually enjoying that bad chakra. Naruto was visibly shaking now, and Hiruzen knew this feeling well. Fear. The boy was afraid of his own power, not knowing what it was. The aged shinobi fixed Naruto another understanding look, and feeling more concerned for Naruto's mental health, he placed a comforting hand on the boy's blonde spikes which seemingly calmed him down a little. That's quite all right, Naruto. You don't have to say any. It's not all right. It's not. I almost kill someone without even knowing it myself. Back then, if I hadn't stopped in time, I would've. Naruto interjected heatedly, his breath now coming in short gasps as he looked at his still shaking hands with his face downcast, obviously sickened with the mere thought of it. That's just wrong. A small breath of silence swept between the two of them, but Naruto shattered it after a couple of seconds. GG. What if the villagers have been right all along? He winced and turned away sadly, desperately biting down the rising feeling of fear threatening to bubble forth. Naruto's eyes seemed to cloud over with countless bad memories when he was younger, his tongue feeling thick and numb as he forced out the next part. What if I'm really a Mons? Naruto. The boy's head snapped up to face the Hokage almost involuntarily, his expression wearing a mixture of surprise and fear. Surprise that his grandfather figure was raising his voice, and fear when he felt a tiny hint of anger as well as hurt in it. Naruto did not know what to make out of it. Gigi has never been this mad with me before. Realizing this himself, the Sandaime quickly schooled his expression back to his usual serene look, inwardly scolding himself for almost losing his temper. Naruto was still only 10 years old, he reminded himself, but it almost broke his heart to hear the boy tagging himself with that word. Though, that did not mean he was all right with how the villagers were treating the boy. Listen to me, Naruto, Hiruzen said softly, lowering his voice. He felt himself softened further as he looked at the blonde, who was now slowly calming down and looking a tad timidly back at him. You are not, and will never be anything close to a monster. You are Uzumaki Naruto, a future shinobi of Konoha who proudly bears the will of fire. Always remember that. Gigi. Naruto left his words hanging. The blonde could feel his eyes getting slightly moist now at the uplifting words, and a small smile stretched on his lips. In hindsight, a look akin to regret flashed upon his face. He felt so bad about doubting himself just then. Quickly wiping away the dampness, he smiled wider. I'm so sorry for earlier. Thanks. Good, Hiruzen nodded approvingly, seeming pleased that Naruto was back to his usual self. There was never a better time to tell him the truth than right now. Knowing Naruto's nature, the boy would definitely try to figure it out on his own even if he decided to continue keeping him in the dark, and it would hurt a lot worse when the blonde eventually did. Hiruzen wanted none of that to happen. So, coming to a decision, the Sandaime went on, I now deem you ready to hear what I'm going to tell you next, and I hope you'll forgive this foolish old man for hiding the truth from you all this while. The truth? Naruto's blue eyes looked at the aged shinobi, his blonde eyebrows rose in confusion. Somehow, he felt a strange feeling of unease churning in his stomach. Wait, so you mean, there's actually more about this red chakra? I'm afraid that's the case. But before that, please tell me, what do you know about the tailed beast, Kyuubi no Yuko? The blonde blinked quizzically at the question, but nevertheless recited what he had read before from one of his academy textbooks. The Kyuubi attacked Konoha 10 years ago, but the Yondaime killed it, right? What does that have to do with anything? Naruto, I'm afraid what you read from books is just a cover-up of what really happened. The village leader glanced remorsefully at the boy, who now looked even more confused than before. Well, that was to be expected. Making sure Naruto's attention was still glued on him, Hiruzen continued. The Kyuubi, in fact, is a huge mass of pure living chakra, and can never be killed. Naruto's eyes widened, but Hiruzen went on. Even if it is somehow miraculously destroyed, it will just reform over and over again, maybe in days, months or even years, no one knows. But before I move on, Naruto looked more and more curious as he listened, but was surprised when Hiruzen rummaged his Hokage robe and took out a transparent bottle of drinking water and held it in front of him. Wait, what? Why a bottle? Blonde eyebrows furrowed in confusion as Naruto took in the clear water container, which was absolutely nothing out of ordinary. Before he could ponder any longer, though, the wizened voice of the Hokage brought his attention back to him. Well now, Naruto, tell me, what do you see? Naruto took a few seconds to take a closer scrutiny at the object of interest, but no matter how he tried to spot something special about it, there was none. He frowned slightly, his eyes giving the bottle one final look before craning back up to the cage-level shinobi. A bottle? With water inside? Naruto answered slowly, as if trying to find a hidden meaning behind what he could see, but failed to see any. At his answer, the Sandaime smiled warmly. That's correct, the Hokage nodded affirmatively. Naruto felt his eyebrows arched up in a show of puzzlement, the boy looking numbly surprised. Wait, that's really the answer? Now, another question. Since the water is obviously inside the bottle, does the bottle become the water? Wha? Of course not, Naruto replied based on pure logic, unable to think of any other answers. It just keeps the water from spilling out. The questions had just become weirder and weirder, to a point which the boy started wondering whether the Hokage had gone crazy or something. And what was getting him even more confused was that the Hokage smiled even wider at his reply. Very good. Now keep that in mind while listening to what I'm about to tell you next. Hiruzen allowed himself to heave a heavy sigh. As I was saying, a powerful Biju like the Kyuubi cannot be killed, and therefore the Yondaime had no choice but to resort to another method. A strange feeling of unease began to bubble within Naruto's thoughts, but still, his curiosity to know the truth got the better of him. He swallowed nervously. Another method? Gigi, what did the Yondaime do? The Sandaime took a deep breath. It would be hard to break it to Naruto. Here comes the tricky part. He told himself. The only other option was to seal the Kyuubi away. While you might think the Yondaime could imprison the fox into inanimate objects, they are not powerful enough to contain its immense power, Hiruzen explained, looking at Naruto who was fully focused on his words. The blonde did not know why exactly, but he had a bad feeling about this. And he only felt worse as the seconds ticked by. And so, the Yondaime's only solution was to seal the Kyuubi into a living person, but not just any person, as he must still have undeveloped chakra coils in order to adapt to the fox's chakra as he grows. In other words, the Kyuubi no Yuko was sealed into newborn baby during that night. Naruto latched onto that last part as he repeated the new information in his head, and it did not take him long to connect the dots together. Exactly 10 years ago, on October 10th was the day he was born. So if the Kyuubi's assault on Konoha as well as its sealing happened on that very same day, that would only mean. The boy's initial uneasiness gave way to a sudden rising feeling of shock, the cruel realization hitting him like a solid punch to the gut. And, no way, please tell me this isn't true. A small part inside him pleaded futilely, his eyes now wide and breathing heavy. Chills ran down his spine. This had to be some kind of mistake, or a very bad joke. Swallowing hard and a sharp intake of breath later, Naruto made a guess that he most certainly knew the answer. And that baby was Emmy? Naruto unconsciously rested a hand over the smooth expanse of his stomach, which was free from any bandages. Even with all the energy he normally had, the 10-year-old couldn't seem to muster much over a whisper for his next sentence. So I'm the container for the Kyuubi? Almost painfully, Hiruzen nodded, his eyes shadowed in shame as he waited for Naruto's outburst which he was so sure would be coming. For all his prowess in the shinobi world, there was nothing the professor could do, except hoping for the best right now, and fearing for the worst. For what it's worth, Naruto, I'm sorry. Naruto's world became completely quiet. It suddenly became so hard to breathe. The boy felt his heart clenched, and inside his head, a tempest of emotions was whirling as the information sunk in. So many little things suddenly made perfect sense now. The name-calling, the hateful glares, the villagers' refusal to sell him any daily needs, the beatings, and everything. They all twisted and came together in a sickening realization. It felt as if the big puzzle that had always been bothering him was finally complete, the pieces now slowly falling into place to reveal the ugly truth. So they know. His heart began pounding underneath his heaving chest, which felt a lot tighter than it was moments ago. Naruto gritted his teeth as he looked at his stomach, which started to churn in an unpleasant way. They all know. Except for me. For the slightest moment, something inside Naruto wanted to get angry, to scream and yell at the old man for keeping something this big away from him all this while. But no matter how much he wanted to, he just couldn't find it in his heart to do that. Not to the first person to ever acknowledge his existence. To ever see him as a person. Thankfully, the negative emotion abated as quickly as it came. Naruto was silent for a long time, and taking a few calming breaths, he was deep in his thoughts. Getting himself all angry and tensed up would not change a thing. After a few more seconds of silence, however, Naruto still did not make a sound, and Hiruzen was starting to get worried. The blonde's head was lowered, his spiky hair casting shadows over his face, hiding his expression. The only shows of emotions were his trembling fists from earlier, both of which were now unclenched and hanging limply at his sides. A knot in the Hokage's stomach tightened as he almost regretted his decision, wondering if it was too much shock for the boy to handle at his current state of mind. Naruto? There was a heavy stillness in the air as he waited for the boy's response. After another small stretch of tense silence, said boy sucked in a long, trembling breath of air, before slowly releasing it and spoke quietly. Why, me? Naruto mumbled, his voice almost quivering and dropping in volume after every word. Why did something like this have to happen to me? What did I ever do? Surprisingly, there was no anger, no hate in his voice. Rather, it was mostly out of painful curiosity. Watching Naruto's expression with a heavy heart, Hiruzen's gears began to work at their full speed inside his head. He had known this question would be coming, as he began forming an explanation that would not reveal what was not supposed to be revealed yet, particularly the boy's relation with the Yondaime. Naruto was still young, and Hiruzen was worried for the boy's safety. The Yondaime believed only you will be able to use this power. Hiruzen told the truth, his hand reaching over and ruffled Naruto's spiky hair affectionately. He wanted you to use it to protect your precious people, like what you did back then. Cerulean eyes widened with disbelief, and it was a full second before Naruto spoke again. The Yondaime believed in me? Naruto's voice did not hide his surprise, as he looked up at the aged Hokage with silent hope on his face. His idol, the most powerful Kage in the history at that time, the legendary Kiroi Senko, believed in him. Him, a random orphan? It was too good to be true. The boy almost mumbled as his blue eyes bore skeptically onto the older man's dark brown ones. Really, really? A confident nod was the reply. Naruto gazed at the man a little longer. There was nothing at all on his wizened face that suggested he was lying. Nothing at all. Somehow, Naruto felt a warm feeling rose in his chest and engulfed his entire being, and slowly, he allowed a faint smile to spread across his lips. Naruto, the Sandaime took a soft, daring breath before asking, "Do you hate him, for what he chose to do?" Well, I don't know. I mean, it's all so confusing and, Naruto spoke from his heart after a few contemplative seconds, but he allowed his smile to stretch into a small grin. Drawing a breath, he grinned a tad wider, "But now, I think I can understand, somehow. Thanks for telling me all this, Gigi. It really clears things up." Naruto? Hiruzen found himself smiling as well, as he placed his hands on the boy's shoulders to offer whatever comfort he could. Naruto was so mature for his age, and it thoroughly surprised the aged Hokage that the boy took the truth far better than he thought he would. Part of him was still angry at himself that he had kept Naruto in the dark all this while, but the other part of him, though, felt so proud at his surrogate grandson right now. Naruto had his heart in the right place, after all. Truly one who had inherited the Yondaime's will of fire. Minato. Kushina. If only you could see him right now. Whatever the others may say about you, you'll always be a hero for holding the Kyuubi at bay. I'm sure, one day, they'll view you in a different light. The two sat in a comfortable silence for a full minute, with Naruto deep in his thoughts and Hiruzen giving the boy all the time he needed to sort things out. After all, it was a lot to be taken in, now that he found out there was a giant fox stuck in his gut for life. After a while, Naruto decided to break the silence by calling out for Hiruzen's attention again. "Gigi, are there others who are like me?" Hiruzen raised an eyebrow in response, as he did not quite expect such a question. Though, he decided it would bring no harm to answer this one. If anything, knowing the answer would definitely make Naruto feel a tad better about his predicament. The boy needed reassurance right now. "Yes, there are," the Sandaime answered honestly, watching as Naruto looked at him with an expression akin to surprise. "In fact, there are 8 other individuals somewhere in this world who shoulder the same special burden like you," he added with a bitter tone, and these individuals are widely known as Jinchuriki, the power of human sacrifice. Riki. Naruto tested the word on his tongue. The meaning of the word really did held a certain amount of bitterness behind it, but it was just a way of referring to unique people like him, so he decided not to put too much thought into it. That aside, please understand that whatever we have discussed about Kyuubi is considered as a sulfur monosulfide rank secret. And only you are allowed to tell your friends or anyone else freely without any punishment. The Hokage's expression turned serious, and then concerned. If the fox's chakra resurfaces again in future, do let me know as soon as you can. Oh. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Naruto nodded in comprehension as he released a breath he did not realize he was holding. On the plus side, it would seem that only the adults in the village knew about his status as a Jinchuriki, but on the other, Naruto was not sure how and when he would tell his friends about his condition. What would be their reactions when they find out? Would they? Regardless, Naruto decided to let the thought slip for the time being. Hiruzen sighed inwardly in relief, glad that he got the point across. Deciding that would be all he wanted to tell the blonde for now, the Sandaime rose up from his seat and did a simple seal, which immediately deactivated the privacy seals inside the room. He smiled warmly at the bandaged form of his grandson figure as he excused himself. "All right, Naruto, I'm afraid I'll have to take my leave now." He added with a chuckle in an attempt to lighten the mood, "You know, all the paperwork isn't going to get any thinner anytime soon." Naruto shared a good-natured chuckle at that statement too, remembering the towering stacks of paper which were even higher than the Hokage during one of his visits to the office. "Haha. I guess I'll have to start thinking a way to defeat the paperwork before I take your hat, Gigi." "And you will, I'm sure." The wizened shinobi gave him a knowing smile, glad that the boy had returned to his usual self as he made his way towards the door. Hiruzen let his eyes linger a little longer on the blue-eyed boy, and added, "If you need anything, The Anbu I've stationed outside will be glad to help, just call for them. Rest well, my boy. Watching as the Hokage closed the door behind him, Naruto slowly shifted himself back to a lying position on the hospital bed, thinking about the conversation earlier. Strangely enough, he did not feel as tired as he should be, and his mind seemed a lot clearer than before now that he knew about his tenant. He felt relieved somehow. Yes, it was still unfair of the villagers to treat him unjustly, but at least now he knew it was not because of something he did. He could finally put those haunting doubts to rest. It was as if a giant weight had been relieved from his chest. With that, he allowed his eyelids to close themselves, as he settled for a well-deserved rest. Back in his office, Hiruzen paused in his war against the unyielding mountain of paperwork and looked across his desk as the captain of Konoha's torture and interrogation squad, one Morino Ibiki, walked in to meet him personally. The large, heavily scarred man was normally calm and collected, but judging from his expression right now, the Sandame could tell something was definitely not right. Report, Ibiki, the aged leader urged, his tone serious. Hi, Hokage-sama. The bandana-clad Tokubetsu Junin gave a curt bow. Without another second wasted, he began, all businesslike. During the interrogation, we were almost successful to get them talking, however. He left his last word hanging, a telltale sign of bad news. However, Hiruzen prompted urgently, raising a grim eyebrow. Yes, definitely bad news. The slight hesitation in Ibiki's tone only further confirmed his suspicion. What happened? All four of them Kumo shinobi started convulsing as if they're being strangled by something, and promptly died a few seconds later. A small lapse of silence swept over the office. All four? At the same time, the older man prompted, his eyes narrowed at the new information. Ibiki nodded grimly. Hiruzen was quiet for another minute, allowing a contemplative look to flash across his wizened face as he stroked his goatee out of habit. This was too much of a mere coincidence. Poison? A self-acting suicide seal? Or something else? The man known as the professor began thinking of the possible reasons, but they did not make much sense. Last he checked, the Yondaime Raikage was never the sort of people to simply get rid of his subordinates. Though, he brought his attention back to the present as Ibiki began to speak once more. I already had Yamanaka Inoichi checked through their memories. The scarred interrogation specialist reached one gloved hand inside his black trench coat and fished out a single scroll, before placing it respectfully on the Hokage's desk. And inside this scroll was all the information he had gathered. That is all I have to report, Hokage-sama. Thank you, Ibiki. Keep up the good work. Watching as the giant of a man bowed and retreated from his office, Hiruzen picked up the scroll. Before he even opened it, he could feel a sense of foreboding in the air. The Sandame swallowed the feeling and skimmed through its content. And his dark brown eyes narrowed even further in alarm. From what Inoichi gathered, the one who had ordered for Hyuga Hinata's abduction was indeed the Yondaime Raikage, Inazuma Roga, a formidable bloodline user of the Jishin magnet release. The Yamanaka pointed out that about 2 weeks ago, the Raikage started giving out secret orders to abduct promising bloodline wielders, his sole reason being to strengthen their country's military prowess. It was necessary, according to him, since some of their own clan's members were found to be mysteriously missing from their respective compounds, and they needed something to compensate their losses. Also, from the fuzzy memory of the shinobi leading the kidnapping, it was noted that the Raikage only started acted this way after coming back from a meeting in a new village known as Otogakure no Sato, the village hidden in the sound. Still, it did not explain the part where worried Hiruzen the most. How did the kidnappers bypass the security barrier surrounding the village? Massaging his temples, Hiruzen rested his chin onto his interlocked fingers, eyes closed in deep thought as he let the new information sink in. He could not throw off his gut feeling that something suspicious was definitely going on between the lines. But what? I'll need Jiraiya's help, he thought grimly. Yes, summoning the greatest spymaster Konoha ever produced, one of the legendary Sannin, his student, to dig some more information on this mysterious Otogakure no Sato seemed to be a good way to start. And throughout his long life, Hiruzen had only known of one person who was so obsessed with studying powerful Kekkei Genkei. His eyes widened. It couldn't be. Taking a slow, long breath of his favorite pipe, the revered leader allowed the taste of tobacco leaves to linger in his mouth a little longer, before releasing it with a deep sigh. I'm getting far too old for this. Back to Naruto's hospital room. Later in the evening, the blonde woke up to discover another pleasant surprise. There was a large basket of fresh fruits on his bedside table, and standing against it was a folded cart of sorts. Someone else must have visited him while he was still asleep, and the mere thought of it was enough to make him feel warm to the core. Though, he reminded himself not to get his hopes up too fast. Are these really for me? Naruto slowly sat up, his expression one of puzzlement and growing disbelief as he picked up the handmade card to give it a better look. Cerulean blue eyes were quickly drawn to a rough, but rather detailed sketch of a familiar grinning face in bright shades of colored pens on the cover, and that alone reassured him. His face. It was definitely for him. Must be Kiba's work. Naruto found himself snickering as he studied the card a little longer, smiling despite the simplicity of it. Somehow, the boy told himself, the others must have caught wind of what had happened to him, but a part of him hoped that they did not hear the full story for obvious reasons. Shrugging away the thought, Naruto slowly flipped the card open, and was surprised to see differently angled lines of messages, each in different handwritings. Holding it closer, he began to read it. Troublesome, get well soon. The blonde was already chuckling lightly as he read the first short message that caught his eyes, written in a stroke of laziness that he knew too well. Definitely Shikamaru's. He continued to the next, this one looking neater than the first, but still familiar enough. How you feeling, Naruto? But don't worry, the fruits will do you good. Eat up. Naruto's smile got wider. Choji's. Tilting the card slightly, the spiky-haired blonde read on. The following one was in messy handwriting that literally resembled scribbles more than anything, with a small but familiar paw mark beside it in blue ink. Though, he could still make out the words after a few seconds. How do you like the super awesome picture in front? You better. Everyone, even Akamaru helped with it. Get well and bounce back soon or I'm gonna be the Hokage before you. Hey, thanks Kiba. Naruto grinned, and he could feel something moist welling inside his eyes at this point. And you too, Akamaru. The message after Kiba's was written in a superbly neat handwriting that was unfamiliar to him, but he went to read it anyway. Naruto-san, I hereby wish that you get back to the best of health as soon as possible. Why do I say this? Because it is only logical for a friend to show his care to another. His face scrunching slightly in thinking, Naruto wondered who had written the lengthy message, but he did not have even the slightest idea. Though, thankfully, this particular classmate was kind enough to leave his name a small space away from his message. Aburame. Shino, Naruto thought hard, repeating the name several times in his head, and memories suddenly sprang to mind as he remembered the silent boy who was always wearing a high-collared jacket. Oh, that was definitely a surprise. Naruto did not expect a message from Shino. In fact, they hardly even talked to one another, so it was pretty astonishing to find that Shino of all people considered him a friend. Silently promising he would get to know the bug user better when he returned to class, Naruto's blue eyes only went wider as he took in the last message in the card, which was still neat, but shorter than the rest except for Shikamaru's. Also, judging from the freshness of the ink, this one must have been added in much later, too, but it did not matter. HN. Naruto had only read the first word, and failed miserably in stopping his eyes from twitching as he traveled to the next one in the line. The writer's identity was very obvious on this one. Recover soon, Udobi. Gah, why does he always have to call me that? The blonde boy screamed almost childishly in his head a full second later, as he pulled at his blonde spikes in a comical manner. Though, as he calmed down, his heartfelt grin was stretched even wider. It was hard to believe that the usually stoic Uchiha had actually bothered to leave him a message. But, thanks, Sasuke. Barely holding back a sniffle, a now misty-eyed Naruto set the card back to its original position, in a gingerly manner as if it would shatter into a million pieces if he were not gentle enough. It was natural for the boy to react this way. It was his very first get-well card from his friends, after all, but most importantly, the mere fact that there were others who actually cared about him was worth more than anything he could think of. Though, Naruto could not help but feel a little upset that he was still sleeping when his friends came to visit. He really could use some company. And as if to answer his wish at this precise moment, Naruto turned to the door in surprise as a gentle rap of a knuckle against wood caught his attention. He quickly wiped whatever dampness in his eyes away, wondering who the late visitor might be. The comforting sight of a familiar, scarred Chunin poking his head behind the door quickly brought a wide grin back to Naruto's features. His eyes easily finding the blonde in question, the man smiled warmly like he usually did, as he took an empty seat next to Naruto's bed. "Good to see you're awake, Naruto. How are you feeling? Are you still hurting anywhere?" "I'm good, Iruka-sensei. Just a lil stiff." The blonde tilted his head slightly to get a better view of his academy teacher. Still clad in his standard Konoha Chunin outfit with the dark green flak jacket, his teacher was all cheery on the outside, but Naruto could easily pick out the worry and concern underlying his tone. The Chunin was obviously more worried than he was letting on, especially when he took in the tight bandages all around his student's body. "I've heard from Sandaime-sama," Iruka said as he placed a hand on top of Naruto's wild spikes of hair, and ruffled them gently. Hearing that, Naruto felt his heart sink, his memory reminding him of the conversation with the Hokage as he looked down at his stomach. "Naruto?" The Chunin was immediately concerned. "What's wrong? Iruka-sensei. You knew about it as well, right?" The academy instructor did not take long to figure out what his student was hinting at, and he felt his heart skip a beat. How did Naruto? He inwardly panicked for a moment, but then calmed down considerably. That's right, Sandaime-sama had told him the truth. The blonde's blue eyes were quiet and waiting, and looking into them, Iruka could not help but sigh deeply, before answering in an almost guilty tone, "Yeah, I knew since the very beginning. But I couldn't tell you back then. I'm so sorry." "Then why?" Naruto pressed, feeling a sudden urge to find out. The whole situation was so confusing and it was giving him a headache. He lowered his voice, "I mean, you're always nice to me and all, but why? And why not?" Iruka allowed himself a slight pause, smiling lightly as Naruto opened his mouth, but closed it without speaking. The blonde could not give any answer to the question. Obviously, it had never crossed his mind before. Why not indeed? Watching as Naruto gazed cluelessly back at him for answers, the man nodded. "Naruto, you've always been a really good student." He seemed to pause for a moment for the effect, before adding, "And you know what? I always think of you as a little brother I never had." The teacher gave a sincere grin at Naruto's widened eyes, obviously in surprise. The Chunin had always reminded Naruto of what an older brother would be like, but to hear the man admitted this himself made him happy. So happy. In the next moment, Iruka placed his hand gently on top of the boy's stomach. "Listen, what's inside here is not important, but rather." Naruto's eyes followed as his teacher's hand moved upwards, patting the area over his heart lightly to emphasize his point. "It's about what's in here that really counts." A second or two passed, and seeing an understanding smile slowly rose on Naruto's lips, Iruka returned in kind, before he continued, "As I was saying earlier, I've been told what happened to you and Hinata this morning. And I must say, you've made me a very proud teacher, Naruto." "Ehehe, thanks." Naruto scratched his uninjured cheek bashfully out of habit, trying hard and failing to fight down the blush creeping over his face at the compliment. He was still unused to receiving praises from others. Iruka-sensei's smile. It's always so warm and kind. A moment later, Naruto had the decency to look sincerely apologetic, allowing a sheepish grin to spread across his lips. "And I'm sorry." What are you sorry for?" "Sorry, if I made you worry, Iruka-sensei," Naruto finished, and his teacher mouthed an "oh" in understanding. "You have no idea. When I heard you were hospitalized, I was worried sick," Iruka said earnestly. In all honesty, when Naruto did not show up in class that morning, Iruka initially thought the blonde had gotten ill or something. The Chunin was on his way to Naruto's apartment for a quick check right after the class ended at noon. So imagine his confusion when he was suddenly summoned to the Hokage's office by a bird-masked Anbu, and later his abject horror when he was told the news. It was only after Iruka was reassured that Naruto's life was in no danger did he really start to calm down. And this was his third visit for the day to Naruto's room, too. This was the sort of mother hen Amino Iruka was towards the well-being of his students, especially orphans like Naruto who lived alone. Looking into his teacher's sincere, dark brown eyes, Naruto felt a twinge of guilt rising inside his chest. The boy was broken out of his musings, however, when Iruka decided to change the mood a little. And one more thing. Naruto soon found himself swallowing fearfully as he saw the throbbing vein on Iruka's forehead. That was never a good thing. The Chunin instructor gave his best scary look, enjoying the horror-struck expression forming on Naruto's face as his hand balled into a fist and he grounded the boy's head almost playfully. Do you have any idea how much work you've missed by skipping class like that? Huh? Ow, sorry. Naruto winced, his face downcast and cowering under his teacher's look. When nothing else happened a few seconds later, he cracked open a blue eye and looked up timidly, and was met with Iruka's amused face. In fact, the Chunin was barely stifling a mischievous chuckle. It was so much fun to tease his favorite student, sometimes. It just never got old. At the moment, Naruto was honestly unsure if he should feel relieved or slightly annoyed, so he settled a bit on both. Relax, I'm not angry at you, Iruka reassured him, his lips curling and he broke into a snicker. But you should have really seen your face. It was priceless. The teacher only got more amused as he watched Naruto grumbled. Wait, did the blonde just pout? Incoherently under his breath, and swiftly removing his hand when the boy started batting it away. It was a rather funny reaction, and it was a much rarer side of Naruto known only to those close enough to him. Alright, I'm just saying that you must catch up with the rest of your classmates once you're feeling up for it, okay? Asu. Naruto gave a squinty-eyed, ear-to-ear grin as he raised one hand to his forehead in a quick salute. The blonde's expression was really contagious as usual, and Iruka soon found himself smiling as well. Now that's more like the Naruto I know. Chuckling and nodding approvingly, the man decided he had more good news to tell Naruto. Oh, and I nearly forgot. On my way here, the medics told me you're cleared to go at any time now. The academy instructor paused and waited for a response, and was not disappointed when Naruto visibly perked up at this. Being a quick healer and usually full of energy, it was only natural that his student was starting to get bored after being stuck in this room and doing nothing but resting for the entire afternoon. But before that, Iruka's hands reached for the brown paper bag he had brought along, and Naruto's curious gaze followed the movement as his teacher took out what seemed like a takeout container from within. Opening the lid and holding it closer to the blonde, the older man could not help but snicker again at Naruto's reaction when the familiar, inviting aroma of steaming miso ramen tickled the boy's nostrils. I figured you might want something to snack on. Hungry? You bet. I'm starving. Naruto grinned, nodding his head vigorously. His stomach, as if having a mind of its own, chose this moment to let out a loud growl to prove his point. Eagerly but politely accepting and splitting the disposable chopsticks apart, the boy brought his hands together in a simple clap, itadakimasu. Be careful, it's hot, Iruka said, watching as his student started slurping down the seasoned noodles as if his life depended on it. He resisted the urge to sweat drop, but nevertheless smiled at the heartwarming sight before him. And make sure you chew, K? Naruto only grinned wider, the 3 pairs of thin lines on his cheeks crinkled up in response. An indescribable warmth was spreading through him that had nothing to do with the steaming food. He was simply elated and touched to have people caring for him. It was a happiness he once never knew, but one he had always wished to experience. Without even realizing it himself, a few drops of tears had slid silently down his cheeks. Thanks, Iruka-sensei. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. 5 o'clock on the next morning found Naruto back in his apartment room, standing in front of his full-length wall mirror which was almost double his size. Despite his soundless sleep the previous night after Iruka brought him back, the boy's blonde hair still jutted out randomly in its natural spikiness, refusing to succumb to the gravity. Naruto was currently standing in only a simple pair of boxer shorts he had slept in, his cerulean blue eyes checking his reflection over in the mirror. It was obviously not the first time he had seen himself under swaths of bandages in his young life, that much was certain, but this was the definite first time that he looked at his bandage-clad form, and actually smiled. He had done something right. He had protected someone precious to him, and that thought put him in good spirits. With fluid movements, Naruto gingerly peeled away the bandages and band-aids, starting with those on his forehead and followed by his chest and back. As the last of the medical fabric fell away, the spiky-haired blonde turned around and checked his back where the kunai had hit home, cringing slightly as he recalled the memory. Perfectly healthy skin met his gaze, and Naruto sighed in relief. He still had his morning training later on, and he wanted to be in his best shape to get the most out of it. A fresh but quick shower later, A more refreshed-looking Naruto got himself dressed in the same clothes he had worn the day before. They had been properly cleaned and mended by the time Iruka retrieved his belongings from the hospital staffs, though Naruto made a pretty good guess that it was probably thanks to a certain pale-eyed Hyuga heiress. Deciding he would thank her later, the 10-year-old strapped his trusty chakra weights back on his wrists and ankles, making sure to increase the weights back to their most recent amounts. This should do, he nodded to himself after a while, allowing a satisfied grin to spread across his lips. Raising his arms above his head for a quick stretch, Naruto made his way to the kitchen table, and promptly grabbed an apple from his fruit basket. He munched on it happily, savoring its juicy flesh down his throat and mentally thanking Choji for the kind gift. Along the way out of his apartment room, Naruto picked up his moss green academy backpack and swung it over his shoulders, shifting a little so that it was comfortable. He usually went straight to the academy after his daily morning routine at Training Field 2. Wonder if Lee's there yet. He idly mused as he stepped into his usual pair of blue shinobi sandals and strapping them on, before closing the door behind him, locking it as quietly as he could. After all, it would be a bad idea to wake up any unfriendly occupants staying on the floors beneath his. As he let his now sandaled feet carried him down the wooden stairs leading to the ground outside, his cerulean orbs soaked in the peaceful view around him, enjoying the distant twittering of birds and the crisp morning air. Only a few early bird villagers could be seen on the street, with most of them being shopkeepers or food stall owners, but they were too busy readying their business for the day to even notice Naruto's presence. Not that Naruto cared, in fact, he preferred it that way for now, to be treated as just a normal passerby instead of some contagious disease. Though, a few of them eventually caught sight of him, and began whispering hurriedly among one another. Naruto grimaced, but arched an eyebrow in surprise once he was close enough to overhear the topic of their conversation. "You hear? That kid actually helped in the Hyuga incident. Really? Thought it was just a rumor? SHH, that's him. He's coming close." Normally, Naruto would ignore the villagers and walk past them. He disliked doing that, but it always hurt him to see the hateful glances they threw him on a daily basis. Though, today, Naruto dared himself to give a small peek, and to his wonder, the villagers did not seem as hostile as they would usually be, and even though the glares were still present, their intensities were a tad lower. Naruto felt hope. It was a change, a small change, but a change nonetheless. A thin smile tugged at his lips. "Hey," the boy said quietly to nobody in particular once he was alone, as he allowed a wider smile to grace his features. A fierce determination seemed to gleam in his vibrant blue eyes as he looked at the sky. He had made up his mind. "I won't let you down, Gigi, everyone." He fisted his hand and held it skywards towards the direction of the Hokage monument. "And you too, Yondaime. Just watch me." With that, Naruto hitched his backpack more securely onto his shoulder and picked up his pace, an extra spring in his steps as he jogged towards the training ground with a renewed vigor. Kumogakure no Sato, in the Raikage's office. "How did it go?" The Yondaime Raikage looked up at his messenger, who was kneeling respectfully before him. Flowing, customary white robe adorning his form, the leader of Kumogakure no Sato was in his late 30s, and had most of his facial features overshadowed by the hat covering his head. Instead of the kanji for fire like that of the Hokages, this one sported the one for thunder. "I'm afraid the operation has ended in failure." Raikage-sama, the messenger, a young chunin with black hair bowed lower, bracing himself in case of his leader's wrath. The Yondaime Raikage had always been a strict man, which meant he would hardly tolerate any failures in important missions. A few seconds passed, and something unexpected happened. The Raikage began to chuckle. Very uncharacteristically. "Ku. That's so? No matter, Shirai-kun. I never expect them to succeed anyway." The Raikage addressed his messenger casually with an unusually sibilant voice, his thin lips twisted into a crooked mimicry of a smirk. Shirai felt the air around him suddenly grew much colder than usual. It was as if his insides had been frozen solid. Something was not right here. The Raikage had never chuckled, and was definitely not one to take the lives of his followers this lightly. Quite the contrary, I'd be genuinely surprised if they did, being the bunch of nobodies they are. The Chunin could not help but gave his leader an odd look. "Our Raikage-sama?" The four of them were just merely a test against Konoha's defenses. "The Byakugan can wait." I can hunt for them at my own leisure. But not before I'm done studying all the Kekkei Genkai Kumo has to offer, of course. The white-robed man continued cryptically, not even deigning to spare a glance at his subordinate's increasingly puzzled reaction. Now, what do you say I show you something interesting as a thank you, for all your hard work so far? Wah! What do you mean? Getting more bewildered by the second, Shirai looked up at his leader, who decided to amuse him by tilting his cage hat a little higher so he could get a better view of his face. Instead of the Raikage's usual pistachio-green eyes, an unfamiliar pair of slitted golden eyes outlined with purple markings was staring right back at him. For that precise moment, the Chunin felt as if he were a powerless prey before a bloodthirsty predator. And he had no idea how right he was. Only then, recognition dawned like a jackhammer to his head. This man, no, monster before him was not the Raikage. Those haunting, serpentine eyes, Shirai could vividly recall seeing them somewhere at the very first front pages of the bingo book as if it were just yesterday, reserved only for the most terrible of S-rank missing ninjas in the shinobi world. Why had he not noticed this sooner? Better yet, why hadn't anyone else did on the matter? How long? How long had this man been in their village, acting as their superior? Y-O-U-U-A-R. Too late, the impostor finished smoothly for him, licking his lips in an almost too calmly manner as if he was just commenting about the weather. Those were the last words coming out from Shirai's throat, before he barely caught sight of a hidden danger in the form of a slithering silhouette hissing ominously from behind his back, and in a blink, the cold, scaly creature had sunk its sharp fangs deep into his neck. Whatever bit him was obviously poisonous to the brim. All the air seemed to vanish from his lungs, and the paralyzing pain traveling down the rest of his body was too much. Shirai let out a muted croak of a scream, not even loud enough to be heard outside the room. He vaguely felt his legs giving up from under him, before his world slowly went inky black, and he knew no more. The Kumo Chunin was dead before his face had even hit the floor, with the helpless expression of horror still affixed at his features. Clueless fools. 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks since the failed Hyuga abduction attempt by Kumo and Naruto finding out about the Kyuubi no Yuko. Life pretty much went on like usual for the blonde. He would keep up his training early in the mornings with Lee, who had fussed over him the next day after finding out that he was hospitalized, attended the academy classes with Hinata, grabbed some bites at Ichiraku's, the old chef, as well as his daughter had the same worried reactions as Lee, if not more, and read whatever good books he could get his hands on during nighttime. Though, it did not come without a positive twist. Naruto was still finding this a little hard to believe. The once neutral-looking Hyuga clan members he met along the Konoha streets would now greet him politely, and he would always return their gestures by waving back with equal politeness, which definitely earned him some added points in their book. It had been rather awkward at first with the sudden attention, but this was definitely one change he would welcome with open arms. On the other hand, most of the villagers would still throw him the usual looks of hate and disgust, with a small group of them now spreading rumors about how the demon brat had somehow charmed the Hyuga clan under its dark clutches. But Naruto knew better than to let those spiteful comments get to him. And thankfully, none of them seemed to know about him unconsciously tapping into Kyuubi's chakra during his most recent fight. The Hokage must have covered it up pretty well. However, the best thing that happened was that the Sandaime himself had deemed Naruto's selfless deed worthy of successful B-rank mission, and the blonde had been rewarded with a nice sum of mission payment as a result. The 10-year-old vividly remembered how surprised he was when he first found the payment envelope with a short official note attached, under his door in one of the mornings. Though, Naruto did not have anything specific in mind about what he should do with the money at the moment, so the boy decided to just keep it under a loose floorboard below his bed where he hid the rest of his more precious possessions from curious eyes. It was weekend today, which meant the young Uzumaki was free from any classes for the entire day. This was precisely why he now found himself in the usual training field right now, trying to figure out a solution to the latest problem he had been facing since a week ago. It was none other than Bunshin no Jutsu, clone technique. Naruto called out the name of the jutsu he was struggling with for he had lost count of how many times he had said the same words, and the boy looked expectantly as several faint poofs sounded beside the ground where he was currently standing on. When the wisps of smoke cleared away, However, Naruto's hopeful face once again deflated at the sight greeting his cerulean eyes. Instead of two healthy-looking clones he had been expecting, he was looking at two pale, sickly-looking versions of himself that were not even able to stand upright, let alone convince the others that they were anything close to the real thing. And in the next second, they phased out of existence in puffs of white smoke, once again leaving the blonde alone in the field. I'm still using too much chakra? Naruto sighed inwardly for what must have been the umpteenth time. It was not that he was one to give up easily, but he must admit that his continuously unsuccessful attempts and the memory of his classmates producing good clones in only their first tries did dampen a little of his spirit somewhat. The E-rank ninjutsu had seemed so easy, but despite all his grueling efforts, he simply could not do it. From his slightly haggard breathing and the glistening film of sweat covering his skin, it was evident that Naruto had been at this for quite a while now. With a soft thud, the blonde-haired boy slumped down onto the bed of grass under him in a spread-eagled fashion, ignoring the sticky feeling of his now sweat-soaked shirt clinging against his body like wet glue. In fact, it was already near noontime, and the gradually warming sun of mid-June did little to alleviate his discomfort. I'm not gonna give up, Naruto told himself, allowing a tired smile to grace his sweaty face. Somehow, today, I think I'll manage something. I can feel it. Tugging at the top opening of his shirt a few times to let some cool air in, he stayed like this for a few more minutes, allowing a fraction of his fatigue to dissipate before slowly getting back up on his feet. Naruto shook off a few blades of grass that got stuck on his clothes, his feet carrying towards the biggest tree in the area under which he had left his other belongings. Just like most of its kind in Hai no Kuni, this one was brimming with brilliant green leaves, offering natural cover from the sun's harsh glare like an oversized parasol. Under its cool shade, Naruto fished out a clean sweat towel from his small backpack, ran the tea-green material over his face and left it hanging around his neck after he was done. It was only then that his stomach decided to make itself known, and rather loudly at that. A sheepish grin tugged at the boy's lips as he promptly reached down again and took out a container keeping his lunch, before he got himself seated with his back against the woody trunk. "Itadakimasu," he said out of habit as he began munching on one of the few sandwiches he had prepared for himself earlier in the morning. Occasionally, a few birds would come swooping by his way, and the kind-hearted blonde would treat them to a few berries he had brought along. Letting the delightful taste of fried eggs, chicken, and sliced tomatoes to melt in his mouth before he took another bite out of his sandwich, Naruto's mind began to wander aimlessly. A week ago, Konoha Academy. All right, everyone, settle down. Now we'll be going through the Bunshin no Jutsu. Iruka stood with his back facing the blackboard, clearing his throat in an attempt to get his students' attention. Beside him, his teaching assistant, another Chunin with shoulder-length silver hair, one Toji Mizuki, was leaning against the wall and looking rather bored as usual. And no sleeping in class, Shikamaru. Geez, you too, Choji, please stop eating. After a round of snickers followed by an embarrassed, "Hi," accompanied by a low groan of what sounded like a yawn from the sleeping student, Iruka nodded, and began explaining the notes he had written on the board prior to the lesson. Like usual, Naruto took his seat beside his first friend Hinata, with Kiba and Shino sitting close behind them. Bunshin no Jutsu, if done correctly, would create an intangible copy of your own body, Iruka continued in professional manner of speaking, before gesturing to Mizuki. Now, watch closely as Mizuki-sensei demonstrates the jutsu. This is very important. No problem, Iruka. Mizuki positioned himself in the front of the class where everyone could see him clearly, and went through the hand seals as slowly as possible. When he was done, with a gentle poof of smoke later, a perfect copy of himself was standing next to him, down to every detail. Smirking slightly as he watched the awestruck faces from most of the students, the silver-haired Chunin assistant remained standing as he was, allowing Iruka to carry on the explanation. Now, can anyone tell me if there's any difference between the clone and the original? The teacher's eyes swept across the room for any volunteers to answer his question, and to no one's surprise, a pink-haired girl eagerly raised her hand. Yes, Sakura? The clone doesn't have a shadow, she pointed out confidently, and Naruto, being the avid learner he was, made sure to scribble down that particular detail in his notebook. It could be a potential exam question, after all, and who knew the knowledge might come in handy in the future. Very good, Sakura. The girl visibly flushed at her teacher's compliment, and she quickly smiled across one Uchiha Sasuke sitting at one end of the room in hope to get some attention, but groaned when the stoic-looking boy did not even spare her a single glance as usual, all the while staring at the wall as if the white paint were far more interesting. As long as Naruto could remember, most of the girls in his class except Hinata had been trying hard to get the Uchiha's attention from time to time, but with zero success so far. Well, too bad for them. And does anyone else has anything to add on? The scarred Chunin inquired, and seeing no raised hands this time round, he went on explaining. Actually, there's another way to differentiate between the clone and the original, but it is not encouraged in real combat. Observe. Everyone's eyes followed when Iruka lightly poked Mizuki's copy on the shoulders, and it seemed to distort for a second and then puffing out from existence. As you can see, the Bunshin is very weak to any sorts of physical contact, so the real purpose of the jutsu is just as a quick distraction. Any questions so far? Normally, Naruto would have some questions wanted to be answered, but today, the lesson seemed to be straightforward enough, so he did not have any so far. Iruka gave his eyes another thorough sweep around the class to make doubly sure not to miss any raised hands. When there was none, he took a glance at the wall clock, noting the time, and nodded. Okay, since we still have some time, let's give the jutsu a try. Please come up when I call your names to have a go at Bunshin no Jutsu. Aburame Shino, you're first. Naruto watched as the silent-looking boy wearing a pair of black glasses and light gray, high-collared coat calmly stood up from his seat and started walking towards Iruka. Good luck, Shino, Naruto whispered as he walked past him, and the boy in question turned to give him a curt nod which literally meant, thank you, for those who knew him enough. In fact, Naruto had started talking to him since 2 weeks ago after he got out from the hospital. To the blonde's discovery, besides his lengthy and logical way of speech, Shino was, in actual fact, a pretty decent friend. The only reason that most students in his class had stayed clear away from him was that Aburame clan members were known to house a colony of Kakaichu, parasitic destruction bugs, inside their bodies to assist them in various situations, but whatever response Shino was expecting from the blonde, that's really neat, was definitely not one of them. The bug user performed the jutsu perfectly in only his first try, and the Chunin instructors nodded approvingly, before calling the next student in the name list. It was only to be expected. Those belonging to prominent clans usually had a head start in shinobi training that others like Naruto did not. The blonde watched as student after student went up and returned with bright smiles, and while not most of them could do the technique on their first tries as compared to those belonging to clans, they could at least produce something close to a good clone. Hinata's was perfect too, earning a small cheer from Naruto on her way back, and heck, even Shikamaru who lazed around earlier managed to do it, something which surprised the rest of the class to no end. The process continued, and after another flawless performance by the class genius, Uchiha Sasuke, who quickly became the receiving end of a lot of admiring looks from the girls, Naruto knew he was next on the name list. Next, Uzumaki Naruto. The boy took a deep breath, before walking up to the very front and stood facing his classmates. Getting a permissive nod from Iruka to start, Naruto made the correct hand seals and reached out for his chakra. Eyes closed in concentration, he could feel the warm energy start moving from his core, slowly as it picked up speed and coursing through him. I can do this. Bunshin no Jutsu. For a moment, everything seemed to be silent, but a second later, an eruption of funny laughter from his classmates reached his ears. Perplexed, Naruto nervously cracked open an eye and looked at his results, only to see two sickly-looking, discolored lumps which were supposed to be his copies on the ground next to him. They did not even resemble him in any way. Wah, I'm pretty sure I did the hand seals correctly. Iruka seemed to be wanting to say something, probably to throw him some advice or get the class to settle down, but Mizuki had beaten him to the punch. Walking closer, the silver-haired teaching assistant gave Naruto what seemed like a kind smile like he always did. You know, you don't have to be so nervous, Naruto. Let's give it another shot, alright? Naruto knew he was not as nervous as everyone thought he was, but nevertheless, he nodded, before going through the hand seals all over again. This time, with a little more confidence, he called out the name of the technique again. Please let this work. Bunshin no Jutsu. Without much luck, the same results greeted his vision, and the only improvement this time was that his clones actually had a tiny bit more definition in their forms, but that was all. They were still weakly pale and were lying with their tongues lolling out of their mouths as if they were dehydrated, for the lack of a better term. The roar of laughter erupted once again, only louder this time with hurtful jeers of "loser" and "idiot" thrown into the mix. Although it made Naruto felt somewhat better to see that his friends were not the ones laughing at him, he would be lying to say that he did not feel any hurt deep inside. Trying to suppress a flicker of disappointment before it could enter his expression, Naruto scratched the back of his head and forced a sheepish grin as he made his way back to his seat. Though, at his failed attempts at the jutsu earlier, no one caught an oddly calculative, triumphant-looking smirk creeping onto Mizuki's usually kind countenance. Naruto-kun," Hinata began as she saw Naruto got back on his chair. Naruto turned to face her, noticing her concerned look. He sighed inwardly. "I guess I messed up. But don't worry, I'm all right." Naruto grinned wider at her, and although he sounded all cheery like usual, Hinata could not help but notice a tiny bit of hurt in his voice before it was quickly hidden. The boy was a horribly bad liar, but deciding she should give the blonde some space to himself, Hinata merely nodded, though not without shooting him worried glances from time to time. The rest of the lesson was a blur to Naruto. He found it difficult to pay much attention, as his mind already too clouded with the earlier events. In fact, the blonde was barely aware that the bell had even rung until he heard a loud cheer from the class. The students erupted into happy chatter as they rushed out of the class in a stampede of eagerness and hurried movements. Even Shikamaru, who was dragging himself out of the door like a flatworm, showed some enthusiasm in leaving. Iruka sighed at their antics as he rubbed the horizontal scar above his nose. Were they so afraid that he would lock them inside here? Or were his lessons really just that boring? The scarred Chunin turned to look at Naruto's place, and was genuinely surprised to see the blonde sitting there, unmoving with his books and notes still on the table. Hinata had remained, too, as well as one Uchiha Sasuke who was usually in no hurry. "Naruto?" Iruka prompted as he walked closer to the blonde, trying to kick up a conversation. "Hey, Iruka-sensei." Naruto flashed his usual smile, but it lacked most of the warm, sunny feeling behind it. Most people would not notice, but Iruka was definitely not most people. If anything, he felt himself softened at such a sight. "You don't have to feel so down, you know," the scarred teacher gave him a knowing look. He did not even have to guess what his little brother figure was feeling right now. Gradually, Naruto's smile became much smaller, but it somehow revealed much more of his hidden emotions. Iruka only placed one hand on the boy's right shoulder in a silent attempt to cheer him up, causing Naruto to look up at him. "Come on, let's give the jutsu another go, okay? Maybe then we'll figure out if there's anything you're not doing right." Iruka grinned, and Naruto visibly brightened up at this. Nodding, he stood up and followed Iruka to the front of the class where there was more space to move around. As Naruto did the hand seals slowly so that Iruka could take a good look at them, Hinata and surprisingly, Sasuke approached them as well, a well-veiled expression of curiosity gracing his facade. During the first year, Naruto was nothing special, so Sasuke thought the blonde was really just a complete idiot like he had appeared to be, but ever since Naruto started becoming friends with Hinata, things just change. For starters, the blue-eyed boy had suddenly stopped his pranking habits. Though Sasuke suspected Naruto never really enjoyed pranking others in the first place, to a bare minimum, and had taken his studies much more seriously even when he was struggling at the start. Sasuke remembered once when Naruto had approached him to ask something. Iruka and Hinata had left, so he was the only one he could ask for help. And to say Sasuke was taken aback was an understatement. The blonde boy would always ask about interesting details that others would usually neglect, and sometimes even the genius found himself unable to give a straight answer to some of the questions. Sasuke was not sure how and when it all happened, but he had unconsciously become someone like a friend to the Uzumaki. The stoic-looking Uchiha with duck butt hair seldom talked to Naruto when there were other students around during class time, so they would usually do it during the taijutsu spars instead if they were lucky enough to be placed together in a match. And when they did, it would usually involve exchanging a few helpful tips with one another by pointing out the flaws in each other's movements, without being overheard by the others of course. Once, when the Uzumaki boy had pointed out a flaw in his traditional Uchiha fighting style, Sasuke was left flabbergasted. Naruto was more determined than anyone he had known, the Uchiha prodigy could clearly tell that, and the blonde was gradually getting better and better throughout the semesters. Heck, even when every time Naruto lost a match to him, Sasuke felt the boy was getting increasingly challenging to defeat. There was this odd niggling feeling behind Sasuke's mind that the blonde was not giving his all, but he pushed that lingering thought aside for now, and focused on what was going on in front of him. He watched as Naruto performed the clone technique and once again failed to produce the intended results, his jet black eyes not missing a quick spike of blue chakra around the blonde's feet when he looked closer. "Dobi, you're probably using too much chakra," Sasuke said without thinking, surprising the other 3 occupants in the classroom as they turned to him. Naruto twitched slightly out of habit at the nickname like usual, but he knew Sasuke did not mean it literally, so he was more interested at what the Uchiha was saying. The jailer of the Kyuubi looked down at his hands thoughtfully. "Well, if you put it that way." Iruka gave Sasuke one of what he could think of as a disapproving look at his usage of the first word, before nodding at the boy's hypothesis and turning back to his blonde-haired student. "I was thinking the same, too. You're overloading the technique, Naruto. The Bunshin no Jutsu only requires very little chakra," Iruka agreed, though he had a pretty good guess of where Naruto's enormous chakra was coming from. The furry tenant residing inside the boy's stomach. Maybe I should get you started on a simple exercise to try improving your chakra control. Have you ever heard of the leaf concentration exercise? Back to the present time. The leaf concentration exercise, of course, involved the use of a leaf being placed on any part of an individual's body, and with a pinpoint amount of chakra as an adhesive medium, one had to prevent it from falling off. Yes, just like what Naruto was trying to do right now. It was easier said than done, however. Eyes closed, something he found to help him concentrate better, and seated in a comfortable position, the blonde tried blocking out the ambient noises as best as he could, his main attention solely focused on a single leaf sticking against his forehead. For the past few days, Naruto had been practicing this a lot when he was free or when it was quieter during night time, but it had been rather unfruitful. The whole point of the exercise was so that he could have better chakra control, or in other words, use lesser amount of chakra, but Naruto just couldn't lower its usage past a certain extent. It was as if he was trying to squeeze a tiny drop of water out from an endlessly raging river. Of course, the blonde had considered spamming his sweeten Mizurapa for the entire morning until he was dead tired and low on his chakra. Then maybe that would be little enough to create a proper clone. The thought was desperate and sounded crazy, yet at the same time seemed rather appealing to him, but he squashed the notion after giving it some serious thinking. It was not a feasible method in real combat at all, and he had been through one just 2 weeks ago. 6 seconds. Naruto sighed as the leaf slid off his forehead and fluttered innocently onto his lap. He found himself contemplating whether or not he should keep trying the clone technique for the rest of the afternoon, but a small part of him decided he should probably look at the problem from a different angle. Maybe there was an alternative way to perform the jutsu? Now that was something to look into, and it seemed to be a much better idea. The boy thought of looking for Iruka to get more advice, but he quickly decided against the idea. The scarred Chunin had been staying back after classes to help him despite his busy schedule, so the least Naruto could do was to allow his teacher to enjoy a good rest during the weekend. Hinata would probably be in the middle of her clan practice in the Hyuga compound, and Sasuke, well, he did not have the slightest clue where Sasuke's house was. Some extra information about the jutsu would really help, Naruto told himself. The boy seemed like he was thinking hard for a minute, and his mood brightened up considerably when the proverbial light bulb clicked on in his head. A big grin then tugged at his lips. How could he have forgotten the best place to get hold of such information? Later in the afternoon, Konoha's local library. Bunshin no Jutsu. Bunshin no Jutsu. Disguised under his usual henge, Naruto kept that thought firmly inside his head as he ventured down to yet another of the many vast wooden shelves filled with various books and scrolls. It was still lunchtime for the rest of the populace, so the blonde was pretty much alone in the vast library. Well, this was one of the main reasons why he liked visiting the library during lunch hours, but he made it a habit to keep up his henge nevertheless, just in case someone accidentally discovered his presence and decided to throw him out. Academy textbooks only held limited information, so he came to the conclusion that the best way to improve his situation was to find out more extra details related to the jutsu he was struggling with. Though, right now, Naruto found himself facing with a rather troublesome issue, unconsciously imitating what Shikamaru would say in these sorts of situations. Well, he had come across a lot of scrolls explaining the other two academy jutsu, namely the Henge no Jutsu, which he already had it down months ago, and the Kawarimi no Jutsu, body replacement technique, which he would be learning in future. But come on, why isn't there anything on Bunshin no Jutsu? Naruto could not help but let out a tired sigh as he once again tried his luck checking through another bookcase on which laid an endless wealth of knowledge. The 10-year-old scanned through the contents left and right, but once again, he could find nothing relevant. Heck, he had even checked through the shelves twice to make sure he did not miss anything. Deciding it was still too early to give up, Naruto continued searching through every shelf in the area. Roughly an hour later, a physically drained, still empty-handed blonde continued walking past shelves after shelves of reading materials which he had searched previously. Evidently, even with his amount of stamina, the non-stop searching process was starting to tire him out. He began to wonder at the lack of any related information, looking a little disheartened. Is the jutsu really that easy? And so, feeling somewhat lost, with his head distractedly pointed to the ground, he dragged his feet through the aisles towards the last, old-looking shelf that remained unchecked in the area, and promptly collided with someone who was carrying a large stack of books and scrolls that obscured her vision. The sudden impact ended with both of them collapsing on their backs, the thick pile of books and scrolls slipping out of the other person's grasp before scattering unceremoniously onto the floor. Naruto let out a surprised yelp as a single or two of the thicker books fell on his legs, the process dispelling his Henge no Jutsu without him knowing it happening. And as if that were not enough, one of them must have knocked onto the old shelf, and a small, weathered-looking scroll rolled off its precarious position and dropped onto Naruto's head, eliciting another yelp from the poor boy. OWW. Naruto groaned, before gingerly rubbing the throbbing area and sat up quickly, trying to survey the situation even with his vision now seeing two of everything. He sluggishly picked the half-unfurled scroll that landed on him earlier and brought it in front of his face for a quick look. His blue eyes were still too dazed to get a clear picture of everything, but he managed to make out three big words he was searching for. Bunshin no Jutsu. He read, and his eyes widened with disbelief and joy as if he had struck gold. This was what he was searching for since over an hour ago. And to think it had found him instead of the other way round. Oh, the irony. Though, Naruto suddenly felt he was forgetting something, or more accurately, someone, before realization hit him and he turned towards whoever he had collided with. That someone, now revealed as a teenage girl looking not much older than him, was gently dusting herself off, before her hand began groping to find something on the floor. With her Konoha forehead protector tied backwards around her waist like a sash, she was clothed casually in a dark red dress with a white coat over the garment, and it was only seconds later that she found what she was looking for, a pair of swirled-tinted glasses which she hastily wore it back on. And, like Naruto, it was only then she remembered she had just collided onto someone else earlier. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm very sorry. The teenage girl in question panicked as she hastily shoved aside the books that were strewn all over the tiled floor, and hurried beside Naruto in a heartbeat. When she was closer, the boy noticed she also had blonde hair, but it was a lighter shade compared to his and tied in a loose ponytail with occasional strands sticking out, giving it a slightly disheveled look. She quickly helped the still slightly groggy-looking Naruto back to a standing position, a very concerned look gracing her face as she dusted him off. Are you alright? I didn't expect to bump into anyone here. The girl continued breathlessly in an almost incoherently fast manner due to obvious panic, and started bowing effusively in apology. I was so careless. Please be alright? I'm so very sorry. I really am. Sweat dropping at her rather exuberant display, Naruto was left speechless on the spot, not really knowing how to continue, and it was only a few seconds later that he found his voice back. I am okay, I guess, Naruto said with his stunned expression still in place, a little unsure of what to make out of the situation. Checking himself over for any signs of injuries, the worst he could feel were just some light bruising on his left leg, but he decided not to worry her with it. After all, it was nothing a good night's sleep could not fix. And, well, it's my fault for not seeing where I was going, so I should be the one apologizing. He managed a small grin. Sorry. No, how can it be your fault? Like I said, I was careless, the girl insisted, shaking her head. Out of courtesy, Naruto settled with helping her piling up the stack of books and scrolls, and the bespectacled teen took this chance to study the boy in greater detail. There was something telling her that she had heard about him somewhere from one of her Hyuga friends, and after doing some memory recalling, it hit her. Raising a finger to point at the boy unbelievingly, she found herself blurting out what was of her mind. Blonde hair, blue eyes, whiskers. No way, you can't possibly be Uzumaki Naruto-kun? There was a moment of silence as the boy registered her words. Huh? How did she? Wait, don't tell me that. Naruto, who was currently placing down the last of the scrolls on the neat pile, froze up instantly, before glancing into the nearest glass casing. Much to confirm his fears, he found his own reflection staring right back at him. My henge. The boy began to panic, now that his cover was blown. Finding no excuse, Naruto only nodded numbly, before holding his hands up placatingly in front of him in a feeble attempt to defend himself. It was almost as if he were expecting to be hit or something. Look, I can express, the whiskered boy began a little frantically, but he found himself losing confidence after seeing the shocked look spreading across the girl's face. For a moment, Naruto looked half ready to bolt at the first sign of hostility, totally thinking that he was screwed, but... So it's really you. You're the boy who saved the Hyuga heiress? Lane, I was just... Naruto blinked. He blinked again, stupefied by the sudden loss of tension in the air. That was pretty anticlimactic for the lack of a better word, but the suddenness of the question being asked had caught him off guard. Naturally, Naruto expected to get yelled out by now, but by some stroke of luck, he was not. This was a good sign, and that thought alone had calmed him down somewhat. Now lowering his hands and looking blankly at the girl, Naruto noticed she had an eager and expectant look on her face that unnerved him somewhat. Not really. I'm not the one who saved Hinata, her two-chan did. Naruto corrected her claim as politely as he could, recalling the event 2 weeks ago. And all I did was, he had the tendency to look embarrassed, as he scratched his cheeks out of habit. I practically just got my butt kicked all over the place. Really? Oh, but still, that was very brave of you, so don't sell yourself too short. The girl chuckled good-naturedly at Naruto's choice of words. The boy in question was not sure whether she had said all that just to make him feel better, but he appreciated the thought nevertheless. With a friendly smile across her lips, the white-clad girl held out her right hand while gesturing to herself with her other one to properly introduce herself. I'm Shiho, by the way. It's a pleasure knowing you, Naruto-kun. Naruto was slightly tentative at first, but he eventually found himself grinning and returning the handshake with a firm grip. Same here, Shiho-ni-chan. Naruto took this time to wonder a little bit at himself. It just so happened that he seemed to have a knack for making friends under the weirdest of situations. Though, when he noticed the teenage girl stiffened at the way he called her, Naruto grew nervous. Sorry, I just kinda. Hee. Shiho-ni-chan sounds just about right. I kinda like it. Shiho giggled again at the younger boy's response. It was strange if she seriously think about it. She had started talking with him just about less than 5 minutes ago, but right now, she felt as if they had become something akin to good friends, just like that. There was just something inside him that made Shiho wanted to know him better. So, what brings you here today? Anything I can help with? Truthfully, Naruto was somewhat glad that he had bumped into this person earlier. Shiho was not hurrying him off or even glaring at him, but instead she had offered to befriend him willingly. In short, he had found what he needed, and made a new friend as an added bonus. It was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Oh, I was searching for something to help me with basic bunshin. Naruto picked up the old-looking scroll that had dropped onto him earlier, and flashed another grin, but I guess I've found what I was looking for. He paused and looked sheepish for a moment. Or rather, it has found me. Seeing a somewhat disappointed look dawned on his new friend's face, Naruto quickly added, on second thought, I think I'll need some books on chakra control. Shiho smiled enthusiastically. And I know just the thing you'll need. Come with me, please. Naruto followed suit, and recalling the one of their earlier conversations, the blonde decided to add in as he grinned nervously and pointed at the distinctive thin lines on his cheeks. And, these aren't whiskers, by the way. Sandame Gigi told me they're called birthmarks. Ah, that's so? And has any girls in your class told you that you look kinda cute with those? Shiho asked a little too teasingly out of mischief, and she giggled in amusement as Naruto nearly walked headfirst into the nearest bookcase and sputtered wordlessly for a reply a second later, his face flushing a deep shade of scarlet that he did not think was even possible. I am not cute. As he let Shiho lead him around the library, Naruto had not only ended up with a hardcover book on basic chakra control for dummies, but Shiho had suggested that he should give himself a head start to get Kawarimi no Jutsu down so he would have more time to work on other things during his final year in the academy. A good shinobi is one who always plans ahead, or at least that's what I've heard from my friends. The library assistant shared the advice along the way, her fingers trailing along the spines of the books to find what she was looking for. Adjusting her glasses, the teen looked thoughtful for a moment, before she dropped another hardcover entitled Shinobi Taijutsu Basics onto the growing stack Naruto was currently carrying, and the boy found himself agreeing to that statement wholeheartedly. It would never hurt to prepare early. Watching her handiwork on Naruto's outstretched hands, she nodded. I think these will be enough to get you started. I really hope the books will help you. Thanks a bunch, Shiho Nichan. You've been a really big help. Naruto expressed his gratitude, and although he was straining slightly under the thick load on his hands, he looked really happy for her help. Also, he noticed that the female civilian librarian that used to be here was missing, so Naruto thought she must have been replaced by Shiho not too long ago. Well, that was good, now that he did not have to disguise himself every time he wanted to borrow something from the library. I'll make good use of these. It's always my pleasure to help those who need it, no problem. Shiho smiled in a sisterly manner, ruffling Naruto's hair and earning her another embarrassed look from the boy. She added, and feel free to drop by anytime if you need help with something, or even if it's for a chat. You see, it can get quite dull around here. Sure thing, I can do that. Naruto managed a bright grin in understanding, trying to picture himself in her situation, surrounded by nothing but books, scrolls, and more books for the entire day. Yeah, it really did seem a little boring. You can count on me. Then I wish you the best of luck in whatever you're doing. Work hard, alright? Yep, I will. And thanks again. After bidding Shiho goodbye, Naruto wasted no time leaving the library with his stack of reading materials. He returned the polite waves of a few Hyuga members he met along the way, and made a beeline back to his apartment, eager to finally bring the Bunshin no Jutsu trouble to an end. Yeah, he was sure of it. Later that night, back in his apartment room and after a quick shower, Naruto fully, but carefully unfurled the weathered scroll and lay it flat onto the floor. Presently, the blonde was clad in only a clean spare of the drawstring shorts he got used to wearing, his hair still slightly wet and towel hanging loosely around his neck. If anything, this just showed how eager he was to get started. The paper was pretty brown with age, Naruto noticed, and it looked as if the slightest pull could tear it apart if he were careless, not to mention that its edges were littered with countless tiny rips. But he was not complaining, at least he now had something which could possibly provide him more information on Bunshin no Jutsu, and without wasting any more time, he got himself in a comfortable sitting position and began reading. As Naruto's eyes skimmed further and further across the text, the boy's expression changed from eagerness to excitement, then to curiosity, before finally ended in utter puzzlement. Tilting his head to the side, he arched a blonde eyebrow to further display his current state of confusion. If anything, whatever written on the scroll was totally different from what he had learned from the academy class. Requires large amount of chakra and, only a single hand seal? Clones can be dispelled upon impacts. Also a reminder to not dispel too many of them at one time. Naruto tapped his chin with a finger, his expressive blue eyes squinting in thought at the new information. He remembered in one particular lecture that the main purpose of hand seals being invented was to guide the chakra properly from the chakra coils so that it would be easier to perform a specific jutsu. Maybe because it needs less hand seal, the chakra needed has to be more instead? Naruto gave the thought some thinking, outwardly looking as if he trying to digest something particularly difficult. After one contemplative minute, he decided it was probably some sort of shortcut to the clone ninjutsu. That probably made more sense, somehow. He wanted to read on, but was forced to stop after a few more lines about how this jutsu was created by some guy named Senju Hashirama. The text after that was too blurry and faded for Naruto to make any heads or tails out of it. And although the name had sounded oddly familiar, Naruto did not put much thinking on it for the time being. Senju? Where have I seen that word again? I'll probably figure it out later. Naruto sighed at the lack of any more information which was in readable quality, but if what he went through earlier could be an alternative way that might work for him, he was not going to just toss it aside without having a crack at it. Especially not after all his efforts to finally find something concerning the clone technique in the library. The boy shrugged, punching a fist into his open palm and cracking his knuckles in anticipation. Not sure if it's gonna work at all, but let's have a go at it. His course of action set, Naruto stood right up, before carefully centering his middle and index fingers together in a cross seal mentioned in the text which he had never heard before. The boy made doubly sure that he made no mistake and closed his eyes, before he began searching for the warm feeling inside himself and slowly reaching and gathering a sizable amount of it. Bunshin no Jutsu. Nothing seemed to happen for a second, but a few puffs exploding around him eventually caught his attention. Naruto took a deep breath to steel his nerves, before daring himself to take a look. He had been disappointed too many times in his attempts prior to this, so this was understandable. However, the results greeting his vision quickly caused his cerulean eyes to widen the moment he cracked them open, and a growing big grin crept across his lips. Unbelievable. Unbelievable was the only word that could describe it. Standing before him were two perfect, life-sized copies of himself grinning back at him and waiting eagerly for a response, completed with the exact articles of clothing he was presently wearing. They even had the slightly wet-looking hair he was sporting right now. Slapping his own cheeks a few times to convince himself that this was really happening, Naruto could not keep the impossibly huge grin from overtaking his face, and soon he found himself laughing joyously. It was a big success. And all it took was a simple hand seal. This was only his first try, too. I don't really understand, but it worked. I did it. I really did it. Naruto cheered inwardly, punching a fist into the air triumphantly before taking a step towards the closest one, walking around him excitedly and checking him over for any mistakes. There was none that he could find so far, and the clone had looked so unbelievably real. Though, Naruto decided to try dispelling the clone in question, so he tentatively poked at the copy's bare stomach with a finger. Nothing happened. The clone was still standing there, looking weirdly at him. Frowning slightly, Naruto prodded again, a little harder this time for good measure. Whatever he touched felt adequately squishy, and not to mention familiarly warm. For a split second, Naruto almost thought he was touching his own flesh. Though, the blonde had missed the look of discomfort on his clone's face, and did not suspect anything strange. Well, at least not yet. Much to Naruto's clueless confusion, the blonde look-alike still did not cease to exist, and this time, he actually did something beyond Naruto's wildest imagination. Can you stop doing that? The copy scratched his cheeks nervously, imitating what the original always did when he found himself in these sorts of situations. It kinda tickles, y'all, no. If a pin were to drop right now, it could be heard miles away. Naruto could only stare, and promptly froze like a deer in the headlights in response to the totally unexpected turn of events. Did my Bunshin just? He blinked owlishly, but inside he was shaking his head vehemently. No. I must be imagining stuff. That had to be it, right? Right? Complete silence reigned in the apartment room for a good 5 seconds. The other clone took note of his befuddled expression, and decided to snap him out of it. Naruto was vaguely aware when a pair of hands grabbed his shoulders and began shaking them lightly, making him turn and look numbly at the clone responsible. You okay? Said clone looked at the original with his big blue eyes in concern, and when he still did not receive any sort of verbal response from Naruto, whose mouth was gaping right now, he reached forward and gave one of his cheeks a quick tug. Please say something? Anything? Hey. That successfully snapped Naruto out of his stupor, and he did the only one thing that was perfectly natural for a 10-year-old boy for the moment. Why, you talked. You really talked. Naruto yelped, and he did not even realize it when he fell onto the spot where he had been standing. His sudden actions had apparently taken his clones by surprise, as one, they had yelped too. After the initial shock had worn off, or at least most of it had, an awkward silence ensued. The three blondes looked at one another oddly, before the original finally found his voice to speak. Touching his left cheek where it was pinched earlier, Naruto went on, his mind working furiously for an explanation. No way. You guys are real, solid clones? His clones stared blankly at him for a second, unsure with the idea, and they tried moving around the room, touching various objects as they went and then feeling themselves over. As this happened, Naruto noticed something else which was strange about his duplicates. Shadow. They had shadows beneath their feet. Then it hit him. This isn't Bunshin no Jutsu. Yeah, I think you're right, boss. One of Naruto's clones who was currently thumping himself experimentally on the chest chose this moment to answer the original's question from earlier. Boss? Naruto wondered aloud, but a second later realized that it was probably his copy's way to address him, the original. Though it did sound a little strange, Naruto did not mind. He had a more pressing matter to find out at the moment. A mere minute later, all three identical blondes found themselves sitting in a circle around the scroll, their blue eyes squinting in concentration to check whether they had missed any important details. It was only now that one of Naruto's clones spotted something that needed the other's attention. Pointing to the seemingly blank space before the words Bunshin no Jutsu, he said, "Look, I think there's something here. It looks like there's another word in front." "Hey, you're right," his other copy interjected, agreeing at the observation, and soon Naruto found himself nodding as well as he peered closer to the place where the others were pointing at. It was faint, almost completely faded, so it was no wonder the blonde did not manage to catch the word in at his first glance when he was in the library earlier. And not to mention he was dazed after the scroll had landed on him, too, but that was beside the point now. The trio squinted closer to try figuring out what it was, and eventually the original Naruto managed to make out the word in question after straining his eyes for a few seconds. And the word was cage, Naruto murmured, getting his doppelganger's attentions as they turned towards him. The original blonde looked thoughtful for a moment before the realization hit him. So which means, this is Cage Bunshin no Jutsu.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.